CD 7. Chapter 24. The week leading up to the ball passed in the best blur of Faith's life. Everyone said her organisational skills were top-notch amazing. She decided that every CEO should have hot sex with their best friend on a regular basis. Maybe if politicians had better sex lives, the country wouldn't be in such disarray. Having Monty at her side made even the most tedious jobs fun. She'd helped him pack up his house, leaving only the bare essentials for when his family stayed on the weekend. Much of their conversation centred on Clancy's breakaway. Although not usually one to get excited by shopping or interior decorating, Faith couldn't wait to help Monty choose furniture for what he was now calling our house. With Simone and Ruby busy at their day jobs, Monty helped with many of the last-minute tasks. He scrubbed the memorial hall from top to bottom, even volunteering to clean the toilets, which didn't look like that had a good going over in years. In that buzz of newfound love, they barely spared a moment's thought to anyone else. Faith spent every night at Monty's place, lying content in his arms, but snuck off first thing every morning to milk Daisy. It was a good thing she'd had those weeks of heartbreak and anguish, because the food she'd cooked came in handy now that she had more to do with her time than bake. With the freezer stocked with dinners and cakes, Frank didn't seem to miss Faith's presence. She'd resolved to talk to him after the ball was over, when she would tell him he'd need to find a new housekeeper or take a quick course on using the vacuum cleaner, because she was moving out. But sometimes life forced you to deal with things sooner than you planned. A few days before the ball, Faith was milking Daisy, chatting aimlessly to the cow, when a worrying smell drifted in from outside. Was it smoke? Her smile faltered for the first time in days. Pausing in her task, she took a deep breath. Yep, definitely smoke. Every pore of her skin trembled with fear. The last thing she needed was for their house to go up in a blaze. Ryan had been in Perth overnight, seeing about buying a new tractor, and her father was likely still in bed. Leaving Daisy on her lonesome, Faith leapt up, almost kicking over the bucket of milk in her haste. Outside, she paused to assess the direction of the fire, relaxing slightly when there was no sign of smoke near the house. But her heart leapt right back up into her throat when she looked the other way and saw wisps of grey coming from her father's workshop. About 200 metres away from the house, Frank's workshop was where he retreated whenever he needed time to be alone. He'd been spending more and more time there, and for one horrible moment Faith wondered if he was there now. She sprinted back into the shed to get the water truck, then hooned across the gravel towards the smoke. As she swerved around the back of the workshop to where the flames appeared to be gaining strength, she realised she'd been hasty. She slowed the vehicle and watched from a short distance as her father tossed what looked like the travel brochures she'd given him into a small, controlled fire. Despite the noise she'd made in her rush to get here, he didn't appear to have noticed her arrival. He hurled another brochure into the smoke, then turned slightly. She saw the exact moment he registered her presence. His face scrunched up into a scowl. Then he turned away and tossed the remaining brochures into the flames, but not before she saw tears running down his cheeks. For the first time in a long while, her heart softened towards her father. Maybe Monty was right. Maybe something more than anger was at the root of his grouchy attitude. And maybe, just maybe, it had nothing to do with her. Oh, Dad. She laid her head briefly on the steering wheel. Frank Forrester was of the generation that believed men didn't cry, that people should simply deal with their own troubled emotions and move on. Should she get out of the truck and ask him if he needed to talk? Approaching him in this state might only alienate him more. She bit her lip, hesitating, but the thought of Monty and how they'd been avoiding their feelings for each other, living a lie until they confronted them, had her fingers on the door handle. As long as people ignored things like this, nothing could ever be fixed. Maybe this was fate's way of telling her she needed to make the first move. Maybe her father needed her help. This thought gave Faith the courage she needed to climb out of the truck. "Dad," she called as she headed across the patchy grass. His scowl grew. "What do you want?" Anger welled up inside her. What right did he have to treat her like this? But she forced it away, remembering a time when he rarely got angry. "To talk," she said softly. "I need to talk to you, Dad." He harumphed. "We don't all have time to stand around flapping our gums, Missy." "But you've got plenty of time to stand around burning travel brochures." She swallowed these words. No good had ever come from throwing sarcasm at anger. "How about I make you breakfast? A full truckie's delight." Although Frank had never been a truckie, he loved a good cooked breakfast. What man didn't? He'd have to be really angry to turn her down. His shoulders heaved as a defeated sigh left his lips, and he nodded at the fire. "Just let me make sure this is safely put out." "Okay, Dad. I'll see you soon." As Faith drove the water truck to the shed, she prayed that someone out there would cut her a little slack and soften her father's hardened heart. Frank returned to the house just as she was laying the spread, bacon, eggs, beans, fried bread and sausages, on the table. For the first time in a long while, he'd taken the time to kick off his boots at the front door, but she tried not to put too much hope in this sign. They sat together like two strangers sharing the last table in a cafe, when both would have preferred to sit alone. Her dad shoveled food into his mouth at the speed of light, while Faith picked at her eggs. She needed to talk now, before he finished and got up, and she'd missed her chance. "Dad, why are you so angry with me lately? Is it because I complained about doing all the housework?" She tripped over her words as she rushed to get the questions out, both of them sounding terribly pathetic when she heard them out loud. "I know things haven't been good between us for a long while, not like they used to be, but I love you, and I want to fix this." His face fell. He placed the fork that had been halfway to his mouth down on his plate and looked directly at her for the first time in months. Faith noticed a hint of wetness in his eyes, and the simple sight of what Frank would consider a weakness caused her heart to ache. "I love you too." 2 tears slipped down his face as he reached out to take hold of her hand across the table. That was the last thing she'd expected him to say. The shock opened the floodgates of her tears, and they silently streamed down her face. "I tried to talk to you a few weeks back, outside, but I couldn't work out what the hell to say," he said, staring glumly into his hands. She guessed he was referring to the time he'd confronted her about Cassie's car. "What did you want to say, Dad? What have I done to upset you?" "Oh, Faith, I'm sorry." He lifted his face and pressed his hand against his mouth, as if trying to plug his emotion. "I've been a bastard, a terrible father. Your mother would be so disappointed in me." She shook her head. "I don't think so. Mum loved you with her whole heart. You could do no wrong." "I miss her so much," he confessed. "Every morning I get up and go to make her a cup of tea like I used to. And then I remember she's not just missing from the bed. She's gone from our lives forever. I just don't know how to be without her." "I miss her too." Those weeks of pain after first sleeping with Monty, she'd needed her mum so badly. And now things were right with him, she wanted to share her joy. "I don't know why we stopped talking about her, but I don't think it's done any of us any good. You can always talk to me about her. In fact, I'd love you to. And I'm sure Ryan feels the same way." Their memories shouldn't be confined to lonely rooms. They would all feel better if they shared their recollections together. He nodded. "I don't deserve you to. After the way I've treated you, you should have given up on me." "You don't give up on your loved ones, Dad. I know you were angry with me for bringing you all those travel brochures, but maybe you should get away for a while. Go on a cruise or something." He snorted, wiped his nose on his flannelette sleeve. "Can you imagine me on a cruise?" She smiled. "Okay, maybe not a cruise. Is there anywhere that takes your fancy?" He was silent. "What is it, Dad?" "I was going to go travelling with your mum. It was our retirement dream. Ryan would get married and take over the farm. We'd buy ourselves a caravan and take on Australia. Grey nomads, that's what we wanted to be." "You still can. He held up his hand, halting her words.
I owe you an explanation. When your mother died, retirement lost its appeal. Stopping work would mean more time alone to think. That's why I couldn't handle it when you kept harping on about farm duties. I know you'd make a great farmer, but this property only needs 2 people most of the time.
Suddenly she understood. If I took on those duties, you'd have to retire. He nodded, a glum expression on his face.
But that's no excuse for how I treated you. You deserve a share of the farm as much as Ryan.
A lump formed in her throat. I'm glad you told me this, Dad. But you don't need to worry about me taking over. She laughed. I just wanted to feel like I was making a contribution beyond the kitchen. And I think I'm going to get that now.
With Monty?
Yes. An uncontrollable smile spread across her face. You've heard?
It was pretty obvious something was going on when he was here the other morning. But Ryan made sure I knew. He's been at me to talk to you all week.
Faith grinned.
I'm really happy for you, love.
Frank picked up his fork again, but this time there was a smile on his face. Thanks, Dad. Amazing how one conversation could lift a mood and begin to repair a rift.
I suppose you'll be wanting to get back to him right away.
All that week she'd barely been home long enough to milk Daisy and throw some clean clothes in a bag, but strangely she wasn't in such a hurry to get away anymore. It had been too long since she'd spent quality time with her dad. No rush, she said, turning her attention to her now cold scrambled eggs.
How's your ball thing going?
He asked, making a concerted effort.
Anything I can help with?
Wow, talk about turnaround. He must have noted the shock on her face, for he smiled and reached across the table to take her hand.
I might not show it the best way, love. Okay, I might not show it at all, but I am proud of you. Raising money for autism, that's a good thing. Every time I pop into town, people are talking about this event. I'm real proud of you, and I should have said it earlier.
She glowed inside at his compliment. Thanks, Dad. We can definitely do with an extra pair of hands to set up the hall, if you're not too busy here, that is.
Let's see.
He scratched the side of his head as if deep in thought.
If my daughter will help me move some sheep today, I might just manage to clear a window.
For the 3rd time that morning, a tear trickled down her cheek. But this time, it was a happy one. I think I might just be able to manage that. Despite having oodles of preparation still to do for Saturday night, Faith couldn't think of anything she'd like better. Chapter 25. The Friday before the ball dawned early. When Faith returned from feeding Daisy, Monty offered her a breakfast of caramel Tim Tams, a running joke between them now, as they prepared themselves to start the day. After making the bed with new sheets for his parents, they headed to the memorial hall, arriving as 2 trucks pulled up. One was the Shire with all the equipment they'd loaned, and the other belonged to the party hire company they'd ordered the extras from. Having sold 240 tickets, Faith wasn't completely sure how they were going to fit all the tables and chairs and a dance floor, never mind have room for the stalls and auction items. Of course, Ruby had all that under control, with a detailed layout map of the hall. With her brains and Monty's brawn, Faith was confident it would all come together. Adam, Simone, Frank, Ryan, and what seemed like half the population of Bunyip Bay were also hanging about, ready to lend a hand. Faith was so full of gratitude she felt as if she could kiss them all. Do you think we should start explaining the setup plan to the volunteers? Ruby asked, glancing at her watch. Faith nodded. She put 2 fingers into her mouth and whistled loudly, immediately getting everyone's attention. Okay, folks, thanks for coming. The plan is to get the tables and chairs laid out first so we can start decorating. We'd like to get everything set up, decorated, and in place by tonight. Save any last-minute emergencies, tomorrow the hall would be abuzz with caterers and musicians doing their thing. With Ruby directing them, everyone worked like a colony of ants for a couple of hours, lifting and moving things in perfect harmony. Way before schedule, the tables and chairs were arranged and the tents and mini marquees set up around the perimeter of the room for the local craft stalls and Jenny's New Age contributions. What had started out as a straight ball had morphed into a ball-come-fate type event, something only the country could get away with. At morning tea, the CWA ladies arrived with their promised delights, and everyone took a well-earned break. Faith was floating on the edge of the room, eating a lamington and taking stock, when Monty sidled up beside her. He pulled her into his side and placed a quick kiss on the top of her head. "You've done good, Forrester. Amazingly good." "It's not over yet." "Didn't you know I have psychic powers?" He wriggled his eyebrows up and down. "I can see into the future, and I know everything is going to be perfect." Before she could ask him what else their future held, a flash went off only metres away from them. They both turned to see Jenny Montgomery, a big black camera hanging from her neck, and a ridiculous grin directed at them. "Mum, you're early." Leaving Faith, Monty stepped forward to give his mother a hug, as Stuart caught up behind her.
"Like a kid at Christmas," he told them. "She's been up since the crack of dawn."
Jenny certainly looked like an excited child as she clapped her hands and practically jumped up and down on the spot. "I couldn't wait to see you together with my own eyes and take a picture to commemorate what I've been dreaming about for years."
"A bit of warning before the next photo, Mum. I've been lifting heavy objects all morning."
Monty gestured to his sweat-soaked T-shirt and mussed hair. "You look fine, darling," Jenny told him. Faith had to agree. "Now I can really call you my daughter," Jenny whispered as she hugged her tightly. "Your mother would have been so happy." "I know." Faith had thought a lot about Cassie in recent days, even more than usual, and she knew with absolute certainty that her mum would have approved her choice of partner.
"Where's Will?" Monty asked. "He's waiting in the car."
Stuart gestured to the volunteers devouring scones and cakes.
"He's psyching himself up for tomorrow night, but didn't want to face a room of strangers just yet. Besides, he's eager for us to head to the B&B and see if Pippa's family have arrived."
"Ah, the famous Pippa." Monty smiled.
"You'll like her," Stuart said. "We might go drop him off and then come back to help you."
As Monty's parents turned to leave, Jenny spotted Frank and Ryan. She waved them over and looked Ryan up and down. "Oh my, it's been forever since I saw you. You've grown into such a spunk. Any girl pinned you down yet?" Chuckling, Ryan kissed Jenny on the cheek.
"Not yet, Mrs. Montgomery, not yet."
"Please, call me Jenny. Mrs. Montgomery is my mother-in-law. And Frank, long time no see. How are you? We've been terrible at keeping in contact, haven't we? Faith keeps me updated, so I feel like I talked to you only last week, but it is so good to see you."
"You too, Jenny."
He bypassed the kiss and went in for a hug. They embraced like old friends, and Faith grinned at the genuine smile on her dad's face. "You must all come to Monty's tonight," Jenny rushed. "We're having a barbecue with Will's girlfriend's parents."
"We wouldn't want to intrude," Frank said. "It sounds like a family thing."
"Nonsense. You are family." She glanced knowingly at Faith. "And besides, I want you all to meet Pippa." Frank smiled in a way Faith hadn't seen in a long time.
"In that case, it sounds grand, Jenny. What shall we bring?"
Nothing. Jenny waved her hand in front of her face, dismissing such an idea. "Just yourselves. It's been far too long since we had a good chinwag."
"Alrighty then. We'll see you later,"
Frank replied, his old smile firmly back in place. 6 hours after they'd begun, the hall was transformed. There were 25 round tables dressed in fine white tablecloths, each with a puppy dog centrepiece and napkins folded into bone shapes. Rows of paw prints in red, white and silver were strung across the wide ceiling, and bouquets of matching coloured balloons hung in all the right places. Marquee tables lined one side of the hall, ready for the crafts and homemade gourmet nibbles from around the region. On the stage was the impressive collection of items to be auctioned. Amazingly, they'd still managed to fit in a small dance floor. Monty, Faith, Ruby, Adam and Simone congregated in a little group, surveying their handiwork. "It looks unreal," Faith said, with a very unfaith-like quiver in her voice. There were only a few times in Monty's life he'd seen her cry, happy tears or otherwise. "Thank you, everyone." "Don't be ridiculous. It was a hoot." Simone pumped the air like a cheerleader. "Can't wait for tomorrow night." "It was our pleasure," Ruby added. "We won't know what to do with ourselves when it's all over. Life will be quite dull all of a sudden." Faith laughed. I think I'll be quite happy with dull for a while. She took Monty's hand and squeezed it, and he knew life would never be dull with her. Everyone said goodbye after that, promising to be back early next morning for the final touches. Monty stayed close to Faith as she locked up the hall and counted 10 yawns in as many minutes.
You know, if you're too tired for the barbecue, I'm sure Mum will understand. There will be plenty of time to catch up tomorrow night. We could go back to your house instead if you'd like.
She raised her eyebrows at him, like I'll get much rest if you take me home. No, I'm fine. I want to hang with your family. And besides, I think it'll do Dad the world of good. She'd told him all about the talk she'd had with her father. Although Monty had been angry at the way Frank had treated her, he couldn't help but feel for the bloke. The idea of losing Faith like Frank had lost Cassie, when they thought they still had years ahead of them, didn't bear thinking about.
All right then, he said, leading her out of the hall. My place it is. Family barbecue, here we come.
She spotted him on the side of his arm. You make it sound like some kind of torture.
Isn't it?
He asked. Not big on family get-togethers, like his mum and Faith, Monty would much rather have spent the evening alone with her. But if he had to do the whole happy families thing, it was going to be much easier doing it together. She shook her head and turned to lock the hall, punching in the alarm code. I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. There were already 3 cars out the front of Monty's place when they arrived. He and Faith headed up the weed-ridden garden path and into the house. Tchaikovsky wafted from the stereo system. Will couldn't endure any music other than classical. Oh, there you are, Jenny smiled as they entered. Monty glanced around the lounge room and nodded at the middle-aged couple drinking wine on the couch. They were dressed up, completely unlike his parents and Faith's family. Stuart wore thongs and Jenny a wafty hippie dress, while Frank and Ryan still wore the clothes they'd been working in that day. Will and his girlfriend were noticeably absent. Zoe and Pete, meet my son Daniel and his gorgeous Faith, Jenny said, gesturing the 2 of them. The man rose and stepped forward. He offered Monty his hand and then greeted Faith with a lingering kiss on the cheek. His wife kissed Monty and offered Faith a smile. Will didn't tell us his brother had a girlfriend.
Certainly not one as pretty as you,
Pete said, all but ogling Faith. His voice had the ring of a used car salesman. The hairs on the back of Monty's neck prickled, and he pulled her a little closer. Oh, it's a recent thing, Faith told them. We're just so happy, Jenny gushed. Both of our boys have found gorgeous girls. What can I get you to drink, Faith? I'm okay for now. Where's Will? I'm dying to see him and meet Pippa.
They're outside, Stuart chuckled. Will said something about the house being too small for this many people, but my guess is he's searching for specimens. As long as he doesn't bring them inside.
Monty shuddered at the thought. Why anyone would keep spiders as pets, he had no idea. Let's go see them. Faith grabbed his hand and tugged towards the back door.
Back soon, folks.
He waved to the others as they headed outside. Faith was already scanning the sparse backyard as they stepped onto the veranda. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and he couldn't resist pulling her back for a quick kiss. She leaned into him, reaching up and wrapping her arms around his neck. There was no possibility of things getting more heated out here with their families only meters away, but that didn't matter. Just kissing Faith made his heart feel right. It had never been like this with any other woman. They shared a connection that went deeper than sexual attraction, a closeness he'd never felt with anyone else. So it's true. Monty jumped at the sound of Will's voice and reluctantly pulled back from Faith. His brother had entered the backyard through the side gate, holding hands with a pretty-looking girl. Well, woman would be the accurate term, but she had an innocent look in her eyes that made her seem quite young.
This must be Pippa, Monty said, still holding Faith close. Pleased to meet you.
He didn't offer his hand, because if Pippa was like Will, she wouldn't be comfortable touching someone she'd only just met. How long have you 2 been swapping saliva? Will blurted out, not at all concerned with introducing his girlfriend.
Long enough,
Monty replied, biting down the urge to reprimand him for being so blunt. Hi, Will. Hi, Pippa. I'm Faith. Nice to meet you. Faith smiled at the other woman and was rewarded with a tentative smile back. Are you the person overseeing the barking ball? Pippa asked. Yes, that's me, Faith said warmly. Will said you were a tomboy. Pippa glanced down at Faith's old jeans, long-sleeved shirt, and desperately needing to be polished boots. If you brushed your hair, though, you could be quite pretty. Faith instinctively lifted a hand to her ponytail. Monty knew Pippa didn't mean any harm, but he wanted to protect Faith's feelings. Faith is gorgeous as she is. Shall we go in and see if they're ready to fire up the barbecue? It's an electric one, not fire, Will corrected him. Breathe, he told himself. He needed to remember this wasn't a battle, that no matter how far Will had come, life was always black and white with him. He and Pippa lived in a literal world. No subtext, no nuances, no lies. So it is, he said instead, trying not to sound sarcastic. Who's hungry? Chapter 26. While Faith, Will and Pippa stayed on the back veranda, Monty went inside to collect the tongs and stuff for the barbecue. When he emerged, the others followed him out, and together they watched the sun turn the sky beautiful shades of purple as it sank below the horizon. For a rental, Monty's backyard had a priceless view of the beach. Feeling content and so happy she thought her heart might burst, Faith leaned against a pole and chatted to Pippa's mum while they waited for the meat to cook. It's a fabulous thing you're doing with the ball, Zoe said, caressing the stem of her barely touched glass of wine. Quite aside from the funds you'll raise, it's always good to bring autism into the public light. So many people are nervous around Pippa when they find out she has autism because they don't understand her. I guess you chose the charity because of Will? Faith nodded. We spent a lot of time together growing up, and I saw how difficult life was for him because people wouldn't accept his differences, wouldn't try to understand them. When I read about the dogs specially trained to help children on the spectrum, I couldn't help thinking how fabulous such a pet would have been for the Montgomerys. Zoe nodded. Yes, there was nothing like that available when Pippa was diagnosed either, but I'm not complaining. We did the best with the knowledge and resources we had. And I think she's grown into an amazing woman. We're very proud of her. So you should be. Faith followed Zoe's gaze to her daughter. She and Will had retreated to the garden again and were peering into the middle of a half-dead bush with a torch. Faith guessed there was some kind of insect there that Will wanted to study. Despite enjoying her conversation with Zoe, Faith's gaze kept drifting to Monty and the way he hovered over the barbecue, biceps flexing as he turned steaks and sausages until they were near charcoal. Arms had to be the sexiest part of the male body. Well, almost. Feeling a quiver low in her belly, she banished the thought and tried to concentrate on the conversation going on around her. Once the meat was ready, Jenny laid the salads onto Monty's faded blue plastic table, and everyone ate their fill. Faith, who usually loved a good barbecue, found the smell of the meat a little off-putting and decided to stick to salad. As there weren't enough chairs for everyone to sit at the table, she plonked herself down on the back steps with Monty and listened as people took turns asking him about Clancy's breakaway. She couldn't have asked for a more perfect evening, her family together again with Monty's. Glancing across at her dad, she smiled at the way his fingers wrapped around a stubby holder and the grin on his face as he listened eagerly to Monty's plans for the future. She wasn't naive enough to think their relationship was back to what it had once been, but they were making steps towards patching it up. Her gaze drifted up to the sky, a perfectly clear night, and she imagined her mum peering down at them. Cassie would have loved this night. We're going to be okay, Mum. We're all going to be okay. Oh, I simply can't wait for grandchildren, Jenny announced. Don't hold your breath, Mum. Faith doesn't want kids, Monty said with a laugh. Faith had drifted off into her own little world, but snapped out of it at the mention of children. She had no clue how Monty had conceived the idea she didn't want kids, but she didn't have time to contemplate this, because her mind suddenly snagged on something else. The smell of meat had made her feel sick tonight, and she couldn't recall the last time she'd had her period. While the conversation continued on around her, she racked her brain trying to think of dates. She'd bought a pack of tampons at the IGA a while ago, but was that before or after they'd been down south? Her stomach churned as she counted back. Oh Lord, she should have used that pack by now. Maybe her period was late due to stress or something. Could I be pregnant? She could get a test, but the local chemist was closed at this time of the night. And anyway, a pregnancy testing kit wasn't the kind of thing you could buy incognito in a place the size of Bunyip Bay. Before she'd even walked out the door, the whole town would be betting on whether she was having a boy or a girl. How would she get through tomorrow with this on her mind? Think about it logically. She was on the pill. Wasn't it something like 99.9% effective? Sure, they recommended you took it at exactly the same time each day, but really, who did that? Who had such a strict daily regime that they remembered such things? Maybe she'd forgotten one day. She blinked, trying to order her thoughts into something logical. So what if I am pregnant? How bad could it be? A smile snuck up on her as she imagined the house at Clancy's Breakaway filling once again with children, like Tim and Nora had hoped. She thought of buying a high chair along with the kitchen table, and a cot along with their bed. A pleasurable flutter danced in her stomach, and her head felt light, as if she'd had too much to drink. Drink? She breathed out deeply, relieved that she'd turned down alcohol tonight due to tiredness and having to drive. As a social drinker, her mission to stay away from Monty meant she hadn't overindulged at all this last month. But was any amount safe? A tightness in her chest replaced the lightheadedness. She'd never forgive herself if she had somehow harmed their baby.
Faith, are you okay?
Monty's hand came to rest on her shoulder, concern evident in his voice.
You look like you're in pain.
Everyone was looking at her, staring as if they required an answer, but she had no idea what the question had been, or who had even asked it. She swallowed and looked into Monty's face, full of love and concern, but the crease on his brow reminded her of the brief conversation they'd had about contraception on their way back from Clancy's Breakaway. He'd been appalled at the idea of them accidentally making a baby. Surely that was just the situation, and the fact it hadn't been planned. Or was it? What if she was pregnant and... Oh, gee, she had to get away before these thoughts suffocated her. She needed to share her suspicions with Monty. She needed him to wrap his lovely arms around her and tell her that whether she was pregnant or not, everything was going to be okay. I'm fine, she smiled, just tired.
I'll take you home.
Monty had already discarded his plastic plate on the step and was pushing to stand.
You can collect your car tomorrow.
Thanks. Frank swallowed a mouthful of sausage and started to stand himself.
It's all right. Ryan and I can take her.
No, Faith wanted to cry. She'd never get any sleep if she didn't talk to Monty, and this wasn't the kind of conversation they should have over the phone. As if reading her mind, Ryan piped up. Dad, I think Monty might want to take Faith home. He might even want to stay the night.
Oh, I see. Right.
Frank nodded, blushing.
Of course. You know, you're more than welcome to stay over whenever you like, Daniel.
Thanks, Frank, Monty said, taking Faith's hand and helping her up. We'll see you all tomorrow. She tried to keep calm as she said her goodbyes, but all she could think about was the fact she might be carrying Monty's baby. With every second that passed, the idea grew more appealing, so that by the time they were alone in the confines of his ute, she couldn't wait to share her news. He clicked his seatbelt into place, turned the key in the ignition, and immediately placed his spare hand on her knee. It tingled, sending a rush of warmth all over her body.
So, Forrester, are you really tired, or did you simply want to get me alone?
Cocky, aren't you? She paused a moment. But 100% correct. There's something I need to tell you.
Go on.
Monty reversed out his drive and started down the street.
As long as you don't say you want a pastel pink bedspread and lacy pillowcases, will be sweet.
Something between a snort and a laugh slipped from her lips. Hell no. Then it was her turn to pause. This wasn't an easy thing to say. They'd been so consumed with joy at finally being together, and with the ball and the move, they hadn't even talked about a family.
What is it, Faith?
I think I might be pregnant. Monty swerved the vehicle as if dodging a kangaroo, except the road was clear in front of them. He didn't say a word. Placing a hand against her racing heart, Faith said, Maybe you should pull over. I guess this is a bit of a shock. Heeding her advice, he stopped in a gravel layaway at the side of the dark, empty road. They sat there, breathing in the silence.
When you say might, what exactly do you mean?
He asked after a few heartbeats. She took a breath. Well, when your mum mentioned grandchildren back there, I realised I haven't had my period in almost 2 months. I was due a couple of weeks after we went down south.
But I thought you were on the pill.
His tone put her on the defensive. I am, but it's not 100% fail-safe, you know.
Okay.
He spoke slowly, as if he were trying to work out how to deal with a major problem. Look, I don't know for sure, but it wouldn't be the end of the world, would it? We might not have planned having kids this soon, but we're both almost 30 years old. We're healthy, secure, in love.
I thought you didn't want children.
She blinked. I don't know where you got that idea from. I love kids. I wouldn't coach the netball team if I didn't.
But when we were kids, you said babies bored you, that you couldn't see the point of them.
Faith burst out laughing. He had the best memory of anyone she knew, but I was 10 years old? 12? I was hardly thinking seriously about motherhood. It was probably more like babies scared me. But no, I want children as much as the next person. She swallowed. And I want to have them with you. She waited for Monty to laugh as well, to say something reassuring like, yes, he loved her too, and that was exactly what he wanted. That this was simply a shock, or rather a surprise. A surprise was a much sweeter way of looking at it. But he remained deafeningly silent. She scratched an itchy spot on her hand, played with the collar of her jumper, and tensed as her heart began to pound. His silence spoke volumes. Her mouth remained open, but no more words came out. She swallowed, desperate to rid it of its sudden dryness. Nausea reared in her belly, but she ignored it. Finally, she tried again. I guess you don't want to have a family with me, then? Her hand rested protectively on her belly, which was ridiculous because she might have nothing to protect, but it was instinctual.
I didn't say that.
Monty turned abruptly in his seat. With no streetlights on the wide country road, the only light came from the Utes' headlights shining ahead, and she couldn't read the expression on his face.
It's not you. I love you, Faith, but...
He paused.
Look, as you said, you might not even be pregnant. We'll get the test, and then we'll work out what to do about it.
He put his hand on the gear stick ready to take off again. Hang on a minute, what do you mean, work out what to do about it? She brought her hand down on his. Her heartbeat was thumping in her ears. You're not suggesting we might not have it?
I didn't say that.
You didn't have to. She tried to slow her breathing. Don't you want to have children? There was another long pause.
I'm sorry, Faith, but I'm not sure.
He may as well have shot her point blank between the eyes. Are you serious? Why? It didn't make sense. He was so warm and fun and full of life. He'd grown up in a loving family, and it seemed only natural that one day he'd have his own. Oh my God. She bit her bottom lip, suddenly recalling the conversation she'd overheard him having with Ruby in the restaurant. It's because of Will, isn't it? This was not a conversation Monty wanted to be having in the dark at the side of the road. He didn't really want to have it at all. Somehow, blinded by his feelings, he'd ignored the fact that most people saw children as an inevitable part of any normal relationship. How could he have been so stupid? Faith had professed her desire for a boyfriend, a husband, numerous times over the last year. Of course she'd want a family as well. At the thought of telling her his innermost fear, his chest burned, as if he were experiencing the worst kind of heartburn. But she'd looked straight into his eyes and asked him outright. She deserved the truth.
Yes, I suppose.
He let out a drawn-out breath, swallowed. He wished he could feel differently about his life, but he knew some things were impossible to change. Talk to me, Monty, this is huge. There was an edge to her voice, and he imagined it a mixture of anger, disappointment and sadness.
Here? Now?
I don't think there's any perfect place for this type of conversation, do you? He switched off the engine.
I know you love Will, and I love him too, but you have no idea what it was like growing up with him. He came first in every single decision Mum and Dad ever made. What we ate for dinner, where we went on holiday, the type of music I was allowed to play in the house. He'd have a meltdown if things didn't go his way, and there was never anyone to be with me because they had to look after him. When I went out, I had to take him, look out for him, so I never got to make friends of my own. You had me. I meant in Perth. Where we moved because Will needed early intervention therapy and a school that had more resources to deal with him.
Monty couldn't keep the caustic tone out of his voice. If it hadn't been for Will, we'd never have sold the farm, and I wouldn't have had to work my ass off the last 10 years to get back what should have been mine all along. She gasped. Monty, just listen to yourself. You don't understand. And that's why I've never said any of this before, because no one would. You just can't. Oh, can't I? She took an angry breath. Try being a girl and watching your brother get priority to work on the family farm. Forrester's Rock might still be in our family, but it will never be mine. Never. Life isn't always handed to you on a silver platter, Monty. I know that, Faith. You think I don't know that? But there are certain things that are within our control. I might not be able to change the past and get back my family's land, but I can sure as hell make sure I don't have to give up Clancy's breakaway for anyone. You're not making any sense. Why in hell would you have to give up Clancy's breakaway? Having kids would only complete the dream. You'd be starting your own legacy. You'd be able to pass on your love of the land and raise someone who wanted to keep it going long after you're gone. And what if there's something wrong with that child? He nodded towards her stomach. They don't know yet whether autism is genetically passed on or not. Then I will love it with all my heart and do whatever it takes to protect it, just like your parents have with Will.
Exactly.
He sighed.
Which means if it is like Will, or even suffers another disability, you will seek all the opportunities you can to help it. If that's expensive or time-consuming, maybe you'll want me to sell Clancy's breakaway like my parents sold their place.
Although it hurt, and probably always would, Monty admired the way his parents had sacrificed so much for Will. The problem was, he didn't know if he had the emotional capacity to do the same, and that scared the bejesus out of him. Even though he loved Will, he'd never been able to move completely past the resentment of the things he'd lost because of him. What if he had a child and came to resent it? That is absurd, she scoffed. Who even thinks like that? You're insane. What if the child is perfect and we abort it because it might not be? Have you thought of that? Or what if something happens to me? Maybe I have a farm accident that leaves me crippled and I need you to sell the farm and look after me. Will you resent me forever?
Of course not.
But even as he said it, he wondered if he would. Faith meant the world to him. But what if something happened and she stood between him and his dreams? If I didn't need my sleep for the ball tomorrow, I would get out and walk home, Faith fumed. But maybe I'd be just as well hitching a ride because right now I feel like I'm sitting next to a stranger. I can't believe you never mentioned any of this before. All these years I thought I knew you and I couldn't have been more wrong.
You do know me.
He reached for her, wanting to hold her and apologise, wanting desperately for it to be all right. But she flinched and pulled away so hard she rammed against the ute door. If only they hadn't slept together. If only they'd both been content to leave it at friends.
I'm sorry, Faith.
The apology sounded inadequate, but he meant it more than anything in the world.
If you're pregnant, we'll get through it. I'll provide for you both financially and...
I don't care about your money. A baby needs more than financial security. He wanted to tell her that he would do his utmost to be the kind of father her baby deserved. But maybe it was best she'd cut him off. When your girlfriend told you she was pregnant, you were supposed to be over the moon. But fear had been his overriding emotion. Whatever way he said it, he'd already told her the damning truth, and he couldn't take that back, no matter how much he wanted to, or how much he wished it weren't true. He couldn't change something that was such an innate part of him any more than he could change the past. Starting the ute again, Monty swung back onto the road. The silence rang out until he could bear it no longer.
Do you still want me to be your date tomorrow night?
Not really, she answered bluntly. Right now I can barely stand to look at you, but I don't want to ruin everyone else's night. Your mum was so excited about us being together it's going to break her heart to find out we're not. Let's leave it till after the weekend.
Okay. Thanks. And what about the baby?
He had to force that last word out. No matter what she thought of him, he would never shirk his responsibilities.
Would you like me to buy you a pregnancy test tomorrow? Or see if Dr. McDonald will see you on the weekend?
Forget about the pregnancy test, Monty. You've made your position clear. Forget about the baby. And while you're at it, you might as well forget about me. Chapter 27. Once again, sleep eluded Faith. But this time she was living the nightmare. She'd run from Monty's ute up the garden path, slammed the door and headed straight for her room. Thankfully, Frank and Ryan hadn't arrived yet, so there was no one to catch her with tears streaming down her cheeks. She stripped naked and tugged on one of Cassie's old nightgowns, one she'd worn for weeks after her mother died. As she slipped the silky gown overhead, she felt a twinge low in her belly. She placed a hand against the spot. The cramp surged at her touch, the pain shooting deeper. For a second she wondered if she was miscarrying, and then she realized. Period pains. How stupid she'd been to think that one night of unprotected sex could have done it. There was no baby. Her heart sank as she yanked the nightgown off and traipsed out of her room, down the hall and into the bathroom, where her assumption was confirmed. She opened the cupboard and grabbed a tampon. As the house was still quiet, she headed into the kitchen, threw a heat pack into the microwave, and waited for the ping before taking it back to her bedroom. She needed it for comfort as much as pain. Sliding into bed, Faith glanced at the photo on her dresser and wished more than ever that Cassie was still with her. Oh, Mum. She wanted to be held, to be cradled in her mother's arms. For her mum to stroke her hair and tell her that somehow all this wasn't as bad as it seemed. But even if she hadn't died, Cassie couldn't have given her the comfort Faith really needed, because this time it was never going to be okay. She'd lost everything tonight. It wasn't just the baby that had been oh so real in her heart, if only for an hour. It was the realization that what she'd always believed about Monty was a lie. He'd known every fear, dream, and disappointment she owned. She'd told him things she'd never told anyone else. Yet he'd had this massive, secret resentment festering inside him all these years. Perhaps she should have known. If she were a better friend, if they were as close as she'd always thought, he wouldn't have had to tell her. She'd have felt it herself. A sob slipped from her lips, and she slid farther down under her covers, hugging the heat pack against her aching heart. She tried to work out how they could get past this, but it seemed impossible. They'd been through too much. After the week of utter bliss she'd just experienced, there was no way she could go back to who she'd been before. Unsure whether or not he'd be welcome, Monty arrived early at the memorial hall the next morning. As he sat on the wall outside, tapping his boots against the bricks, he prayed that somehow he and Faith could move on from this. He might not be able to offer her what she wanted, needed, but he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. At the sound of the four-wheel drive Ryan had driven home for her last night, Monty looked up. If she'd seen him, she pretended otherwise. Her door slammed and her boots thumped the pavement towards him. She sounded like a woman on a mission, but she looked like hell. She was still beautiful, and the sight of her curves made muscles jump up and down all over his body, but black bags hung under her eyes, and the spring was absent from her step. And it was all his fault. He slid off the wall.
Morning, Faith.
Not Forrester. She probably wouldn't appreciate nicknames right now. Glad you didn't say good. She barely looked at him as she headed for the hall, keys jangling in her grip. He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He'd spent half the night tossing and turning on his lumpy couch, rehearsing what to say, but nothing would sound right. As if reading his thoughts, she snapped, "Don't try to talk to me about yesterday. I can't deal with that today, on top of everything else."
Okay, sure.
He clutched at a smidgen of hope that maybe she'd be ready to talk about it someday. They weren't alone for long, and Faith looked visibly relieved when Ruby, Simone, and Adam showed up. She threw herself into work, shifting tables she'd decided overnight were in the wrong place.
"Let me get the end of that,"
Monty said, grabbing the opposite end of one table. "Leave it, I'm fine," she hissed. And she persisted in dragging the damn thing halfway across the hall on her own. The caterers arrived and took over the kitchen. The stall owners came in dribs and drabs to set out their produce, and his mum arrived with her friends to flash up their little New Age tents. He shadowed Faith, and when she asked what the hell he was doing, he gestured towards Jenny. Faith nodded, but didn't look at all happy about the pretense. 2 representatives from Dogs for Autism stopped by to introduce themselves on their way to check in at the hotel. They thanked Faith for choosing their organisation to support. She gushed over the 2 gorgeous Labradors they'd brought along, and he stood awkwardly talking to one of the ladies about Will. Like almost every other conversation he'd had about autism in the past, he screened his words. Faith's glare bored into him. No doubt she thought him a liar, or worse, a hypocrite, but what she didn't understand was that he did support this cause. He understood more than most what it was to live with someone who had autism. He'd watched his brother struggle through school and life, and he was proud of what Will had achieved. He just didn't know if he could go through it all again. Faith had quite forgotten about the complication of Katerina Lamborusco-Cunningham until she felt Monty take her hand. Traitorous heat flooded her body at his touch, and in the name of self-defence she tried to pull away. He held on tight and nodded towards the door as he whispered, "I think your friend has arrived." As if this day could get any worse. Faith promptly forgot her dastardly hormones and looked up to see Kat standing in the doorway. Her perfectly straight sheath of platinum blonde hair fell almost down to her waist, and the pair of bug-like designer sunglasses perched on her head turned slowly from side to side as she surveyed the hall. Faith swallowed, suddenly wondering if the paw print decor wasn't stylish enough for an alumni-associated event. Monty stepped forward, still gripping her hand, as he took control of the situation.
"Good afternoon, Katerina. I'm Daniel Montgomery, Faith's boyfriend."
Faith's heart leapt back up to caress her throat as she watched Kat's eyes take in every inch of Monty's body. Or maybe it was the fact she knew his words were a mere facade. From the flush in the other woman's cheeks and the excessive fluttering of eyelashes as she offered her hand, it was clear Monty had scored an A+ in Kat's assessment. She found her voice. "Hi, Kat. Thanks so much for coming. Is your husband outside?" Although Monty was no longer hers, she felt the need to remind the other woman of her married status. Kat blinked and shook her head slightly, as if trying to work out who Faith meant. "Oh, no." She paused a moment, then sighed. "Our babysitter cancelled and both sets of grandparents are out of the country, so Paul had to stay home with the children. I'm a single woman tonight." She seemed excited by this prospect, and her gaze once again lingered on Monty. Faith yanked his hand, drawing him right into her side in spite of herself. "That's such a pity, but I'm sure Adam will be happy to drive you in tonight. I wouldn't want you out late on unfamiliar country roads on your own." "Adam?" Kat turned up her nose as if she'd smelled something shocking. "Who's he?" "Hi there." Adam stepped forward and offered his hand. "The cottage you'll be staying in tonight is on my farm. I can take you there now if you'd like." Kat licked her lips as her smile reappeared. Apparently Adam didn't score too badly either. "Thank you, that would be lovely. A quick nap would work wonders before this evening. I feel like I've driven halfway across the country." With barely a backward glance, Kat linked her arm through Adam's and turned towards the exit. He looked back over his shoulder and rolled his eyes. Faith knew her friend could more than handle any advances Kat threw his way, but she made a mental note to thank him later. The thought of having to babysit Kat as well as deal with everything else on her agenda was too much.
"That went well, I think."
Monty nodded towards the door with a forced grin. Faith let out a breath of relief and stole back her hand. Kat appeared to have bought their charade, but Faith found she no longer cared about the other woman's opinions. "She's not very warm, is she?" Ruby commented. Simone snorted. "Warm? She's like the Ice Queen. I swear the temperature dropped 20 degrees when she walked in. Makes me even more determined to win this contest for you." "Thanks." Faith summoned a smile, but it was an effort. Right now, she found it difficult to garner enthusiasm for anything, especially winning a silly contest. Although winning had never been her ultimate goal, she needed to hold it together just a bit longer to ensure she raised good funds for her charity. After a tense morning, Monty arrived home to find his dad watching the Dockers playing the Sydney Swans on TV. His mum and 3 of her hippie friends were relaxing on the back porch, sipping homemade mocktails. Everything appeared so normal, yet nothing felt right. He offered a quick hello, but made sure not to linger. The last thing he wanted to do was get involved in a discussion about numerology or crystals or something equally ridiculous. His mum hadn't always been this new age in her approach to living. Both he and Will had been immunised as babies and made to wear shoes outside, and although she'd made sure her children ate healthily, Jenny had never obsessed over what went into their mouths. Not until Will was diagnosed with autism. Then everything had changed. Looking back, his parents, Jenny particularly, had been desperate to find something to blame for their seemingly bright baby turning into a toddler who couldn't communicate on the most basic of levels. Jenny strongly believed in the link between immunisation and autism. After Will's diagnosis, neither he nor Monty was ever immunised again. And she was very vocal about the risks when telling anyone who would listen. Dad hadn't been convinced. He'd ensured Will received all the traditional and scientific treatments as well, but Jenny had focused on alternative therapies, especially aromatherapy and diet changes. She found herself fascinated by the benefits of oils, and through this met a number of unusual people. Hence her subsequent involvement in tea leaf reading, numerology, astrology, palmistry. You name it, Jenny had tried it, and made friends through it. Although it was Will who'd indirectly led their mother into these activities, she now did them for her own sanity. She was constantly welcoming people into her house to partake in whatever her latest enthusiasm happened to be. Utterly selfless, she didn't believe in asking for money, but her clients always paid in kind. Some baked organic goodies, some brought plants for her garden, and others would give her a massage in exchange for a reading. Sometimes her beliefs infuriated Monty, but he couldn't begrudge his mother something that made her happy. Everyone needed that. That thought led to Faith and Clancy's breakaway. He'd never have imagined the 2 things that brought him happiness would be mutually exclusive. They shouldn't be. With only days until the farm was officially his, he'd finally allowed himself the occasional daydream about owning it. Although Faith featured heavily in his fantasies, he'd never once contemplated children. He grabbed a beer from the fridge and leaned back against the counter. As he popped the top and took a pull, he closed his eyes and tried to picture a baby in the house, a little boy or girl with a mix of his and Faith's features. At the very thought, a sickening sweat flushed over his body, and he took another desperate pull of his beer. "Have you got another one of those?" Lost in a near panic attack, Monty hadn't heard his dad enter the room. He opened his eyes and nodded towards the fridge. "Sure, help yourself." Stuart grabbed a bottle of Carlton Dry and looked back to Monty as he cracked it open. "Cheers." "Yeah, cheers." Monty couldn't think of anything to celebrate, but he didn't need encouragement to drink more beer. "Where's Will?" "Down on the jetty with Pippa, doing whatever it is lovebirds do down there. Showing her the sights, I think." Stuart took another sip and said, "Thought you'd be whiling away the arvo with Faith. Really good to hear you 2 finally got it together." Monty swallowed, his chest tightening as that panic feeling returned with a vengeance. He knew he should tell his dad the truth, but the truth hurt. "She's getting dressed with the girls," he said instead. This fact still amazed him. Faith had always been one of the boys and shirked attending any girly get-togethers. It appeared their relationship wasn't the only thing that had changed. "I'm meeting them at the hall later," he said. Silence lingered for a few moments before Stuart spoke again.
I'm also chuffed about this farm of yours, son. Sorry we haven't had a chance to talk much about it yet.
Monty shrugged.
No worries. Tell me about it now.
Stuart gestured towards the lounge room. Monty followed his dad to the couch. He rarely allowed himself to think back to the days on their farm. It was too depressing to contemplate what could have been. But Stuart had been a very good farmer, and Monty had often worked alongside him on weekends and after school. Stuart turned off the television and settled back into his seat, while Monty told him all about the trip down south to Clancy's breakaway. Everything farm-related, that is. No need to explain how that had been the place he and Faith crossed a line they could never uncross.
Perhaps I'm a fool, thinking I can take this on when I've only ever worked with sheep and crops,
he said glumly. He'd tried to avoid worrying, reasoning that with his willpower, everything he'd read, and his experience in other areas of farming, he'd be okay. But he couldn't entirely quell the fear. If he failed at this, then what? Ever since they'd moved away, getting his own farm had been his dream. He didn't have any others.
Don't be ridiculous. You can do anything you put your mind to, son.
His father turned slightly and patted Monty on the back.
I'm so proud of how hard you've worked to achieve this, and I'm sorry we weren't able to assist with financing it. We never managed to save much after moving to Perth.
It's okay, Monty said. He'd never asked them for help, financial or otherwise. He was proud of what he'd achieved all on his own, and grateful for his father's approval. There was something special about knowing you'd got what you had through hard work, not simply because you were born to it. For the next hour, Monty picked Stuart's brain in much the same way he'd picked Tim's via email these last few weeks. Although Stuart had only ever farmed sheep, he had some snippets of gold to share, and Monty was glad of the time alone with his dad. Times like this had been few and far between over the years. So involved were they in this easy conversation, Monty started when Jenny wandered in and announced that her friends had returned to the hotel.
I'm off to find Will and Pippa, she said. We need to start getting ready.
Monty looked at his watch, then leapt off the couch.
Geez, I'm supposed to be at the hall in half an hour.
His mum laughed.
Lucky you don't take long to put yourself together then.
She was right. Monty usually had showering and dressing down to a fine art, but tonight he was supposed to wear a suit. And that was a whole other story. He didn't want to let Faith down any more than he already had. "Oh my gosh, you look amazing!" Ruby all but squealed as she looked Faith up and down. Simone, dressed only in a lacy red bra and knickers with a mascara wand halfway to her eyelashes, nodded enthusiastically in agreement. The three unlikely friends were getting ready at Ruby's house, indulging in a few drinks and what was supposed to be fun female chatter. "You think?" She gazed at her reflection in Ruby's full-length mirror, a sceptical expression on her face. Although she loved the feel of the soft silk gown, and its golden colour certainly complemented her newly blonde hair, the only A word she felt was awkward and annoyed. Angry was also a good one. Why wouldn't Monty just leave her head? Faith focused on the gown. It had seemed so perfect that day in Geraldton, but now she wondered how in God's name she was supposed to walk in it, especially in the heels Ruby had insisted on lending her. Apparently black thongs didn't have the right effect. That was all very well, but neither did falling flat on her face, which she felt was a real possibility if she had to walk any great distance.
"Oh, yeah?"
More enthusiastic nodding from Simone.
"Monty will be drooling along with those gorgeous puppies. He'll be wishing the ball over before it begins so he can whisk you back to his place and rid you of that dress."
Monty, Monty, Monty. The thought of him never undressing her again physically hurt. Was he all anyone could think about? Before she snapped at an undeserving Simone, Faith caught her anger. She hadn't told her friends that things were done and dusted with Monty, so she couldn't expect them to understand. I doubt it. She tried for a flippant laugh, but didn't quite make it. His parents are staying at his place, and he's camped out on the couch.
"Your house, then?"
Simone wiggled her eyebrows.
"That's only semantics anyway. Oh, I'm so damn jealous. It's been far too long since my lady bit's got a workout."
Ruby shook her head but laughed. Do you think you're ready to date again? Simone shrugged. I miss Jason more than anything, but I also miss adult companionship, sex, someone to mow the lawn. I think it might be time to step out of my comfort zone and do something about it. Good for you. Any guys you've got your eye on? Not in the mood for discussions about men, Faith left them to their speculations and turned once again to her reflection. Maybe she did look all right, but what did it matter? The only guy she'd ever loved had made his position clear. She might not be very experienced in the ways of men, but she knew one thing. When she gave her heart, she wanted it to go to someone who could also offer theirs, someone who believed people more important than property. Unfortunately, that wasn't Monty. But would she ever find another man who made her insides wobble in the same way he did? Maybe she was cutting off her nose to spite her face. You okay? Ruby met Faith's gaze in the mirror. You've been very quiet this afternoon. I'm fine. She swallowed the lump that had formed in her throat, just running over everything in my head and making sure there's nothing we've forgotten. With so many people coming tonight, I don't want to let anyone down. We've ordered plenty of grog, and that's all the country crowd needs to be happy, Simone declared, taking another sip of champagne as if to emphasise her point. Faith worried that Simone was planning on letting loose a little too much tonight, but pushed that thought aside. Simone was old enough to look after herself, and Faith needed to concentrate on keeping her own emotions together. Not everyone will be drinking, she reminded them. Simone took yet another swig and shrugged. It'll be fine. You stress too much. Seriously, it's going to be great, Ruby added, glancing at her watch. But we should be off soon if we want to arrive before the guests. Eek, I still have to put on my gown. Simone downed the rest of her champagne and shoved the lid back on the mascara. Well, hurry then. Leaving Simone to pull her dress over her sexy underwear, Ruby ushered Faith into the lounge room to wait. It was almost 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The ball was due to kick off at 7, and the band would play till midnight. After months of planning, Faith couldn't wait for it to be over. This is the end of CD 7. The book continues on CD 8. CD 8. Chapter 28. Faith looked out over the hall as she readied herself to welcome the crowd. Less than 3 months had passed since she'd made her pledge to enter the fundraising contest, and here she was, standing on the stage at her own event. So much had happened in that time. So much had changed. She should have been proud of what lay before her, the beautifully decorated tables, the happy faces of people enjoying their first drinks of the night. But all she felt was a sinking feeling of dread, that her life had taken an irrevocable nosedive, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to fix it. As she waited for the chatter to die down, she eyed Monty 2 tables in front of her, looking illegally sexy in a jet black suit, and chatting amiably to one of the representatives from Dogs for Autism. She could only imagine what he was saying, but his friendly smile labelled him a hypocrite. She narrowed her eyes, thinking that if looks could kill, blood would be splattering all across that table right now. She imagined him slumped in his seat, or better still, flopping onto the floor as he clutched his heart in agony and looked up at her in disbelief. The satisfaction was short-lived. She didn't like him at the moment, but unfortunately she loved him, and that took the edge off her murderous thoughts. Adam, who'd volunteered his services as auctioneer for the evening, stepped onto the stage. "Do you want me to call them all to order?" he asked. "Thanks." Taking a deep breath, she readied herself while Adam silenced the crowd. She smiled at Adam and took a step closer to the microphone, looking out at the eager faces peering back at her. Katerina sat on one side of Monty, her smile so wide she bared her teeth. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Faith began. The sooner she got this over, the sooner the evening would end, and she could return to that lovely state of self-pity and wallowing. "Thank you all for coming to the Barking Ball, and in turn supporting Dogs for Autism. As you know, all proceeds from tonight's event will go towards training assistance dogs for children who are diagnosed with autism. I know many of you in attendance hold this cause close to your hearts. Like me, you've known someone on the spectrum, or may have autism yourselves. This night is about celebrating differences and offering support. The crowd applauded, and she waited for the noise to die down before continuing. Tonight, we are lucky to have with us 2 dogs who have recently finished their training. In just a moment, I'm going to invite Jackie and Michelle from Dogs for Autism to bring Buster and Goldie up onto the stage for a little demonstration. They'll also explain more about what your donations will be going towards. Following that, our delicious entree will be served. She took a quick breath. Between entree and mains, Adam Burton will be your auctioneer. The items to be auctioned are behind me on the stage tonight, and there are booklets on your table detailing each of them. My thanks go out to the sponsors who have generously donated for this event. Please check out the list at the back of the booklet. If anyone has any questions, my fabulous committee will be happy to answer them. Just look for the girls wearing dog collars like mine. Faith gestured to the sparkly pink diamante-studded collar that was wrapped around her neck. Ruby and Simone were wearing identical ones. They were Ruby's idea. Quite a nice touch, she thought. After dinner, there'll be lots of dancing and the opportunity to peruse the stalls and maybe even get your fortune read. But now, without further ado, Faith cringed, unable to believe she'd actually used such a phrase, I'd like to welcome Buster, Goldie, Jackie and Michelle. The attendees applauded again, and the band broke into a few lines of hound dog a la Elvis Presley. They'd scheduled every dog song they could think of to be played throughout the evening. Faith moved to the edge of the stage as the dogs and their trainers took the limelight. The audience oohed and ahed at the 2 young animals. Good evening, ladies and gents, Jackie offered the crowd a cheery wave. We are so excited to be here tonight. Together with Dogs for Autism, we'd like to offer our immense gratitude to Faith Forrester for organising this fabulous event. Michelle and I are going to talk a little bit about our organisation and then show a short film about the impact our dogs have had on the lives of people with autism. Buster and Goldie stood to attention, flaunting their cuteness at either side of the volunteers, as Michelle took a turn to speak. Dogs for Autism is a relatively new charity, although as I'm sure you'll all know, dogs have been used to assist people with disabilities for a long time. In the US, an organisation called Four Paws for Ability has been pairing assistance dogs with people on the autism spectrum for quite some time now, with astounding success. Unfortunately, what we do isn't cheap. Each dog costs close to $30,000 to raise and train. Michelle patted Goldie on the head. But when you see the results in the lives of our young clients, I think you'll agree that it's money well spent. Once ready, the pups are placed with the child at no cost to the family, and it is fundraising efforts such as this one that make this possible. Jackie stepped up to the microphone again. A dog for a child with autism is in essence a companion and a protector. These children often find it difficult to make emotional connections with other people, but they seem to be able to form close bonds with their dogs. Parents whose children have received our pups have reported improvements in all areas of their children's lives, and we continue to discover new ways in which dogs can enhance the lives of children with autism and their families. We could go on, but we have a short film that can show you much better than we could. Following the film will be available throughout the night to answer any questions. Come up and say hello and meet Goldie and Buster in person. Thanks again, everyone. The lights dimmed and the big screen came alive. Over the next 10 minutes, the audience learnt exactly how these special dogs were used to benefit people with autism. Despite her interest, Faith found her gaze drifting time and time again to Monty. He was staring at the screen, but the expression on his face was unreadable. Was he thinking about how a dog like this might have helped his family? Or was he so resentful he'd simply have seen this as another way that Will had got something he hadn't? She realised her whole body was tight with anger. Why couldn't he just get over the past and look to the future? Why couldn't he see Will for the person he was, instead of for the few negative effects his condition had had on Monty's life? When the film ended, the hall immediately buzzed with excited chatter. Faith smiled as Jackie and Michelle led the 2 dogs off stage. She forced a smile back onto her face and spread her arms wide at the crowd. Now, wasn't that just amazing? The audience responded with whoops, cheers, and even a wolf whistle. Her anger momentarily forgotten, Faith felt the blood pumping through her veins in excitement. It was so good to see others inspired and enthusiastic. As Jackie said, she and Michelle will be available throughout the evening. She signalled the band, and within seconds music flooded the hall once again, this time Mate by Lee Kernaghan. Faith trekked over to thank the Dogs for Autism crew. Thanks, guys. I know people will be happier donating when they know their money is going to such a fabulous cause. You're so welcome, Jackie said. We're just so appreciative that you chose us for your fundraiser, added Michelle. They took the dogs outside for a pit stop, and Faith made her way slowly back to her table. She chatted to guests along the way, dawdling and more than happy to make small talk if it delayed her return to Monty. In keeping with their act, he'd been the perfect boyfriend, holding her hand, complimenting her on her dress, making sure Katerina heard each and every flattering word. But his perfection was killing her. How she was going to sit through dinner, smile, laugh, and make conversation, she had no idea. Not that she wanted an emergency, but she wouldn't have minded a small mishap to call her away from the socialising. A blocked toilet or a mix-up with someone's dinner would do the trick. Hey, beautiful. Monty stood and pulled out her chair as she approached the table. Everything's going splendidly. And have I mentioned how breathtaking you look tonight? You're laying it on a bit thick. But of course she only thought this, smiling sweetly at him and the other guests at her table. Yes, the event is fabulous, Kat agreed, fingering a very expensive pendant that fell at her impressive cleavage. She leaned into Faith and, under her breath, so that no one else could hear, added, Of course you'll have to raise a lot to make much of a difference. Those dogs come a bit pricey, if you ask me. Faith clenched her teeth. She took a deep breath and glanced around for someone else to make conversation with. Her table consisted of her and Monty, the charity representatives, Kat, the handsome new cop, Drew Noble, in the seat that was meant for Kat's absent husband, and two other local farming couples. Not that they looked like farmers tonight. For people who spent most of their lives in dirty boots, torn jeans and chambray shirts, the Bunyip Bay locals scrubbed up well when they put their minds to it. You look amazing, Julie, Faith told one of the women. Where did you get that dress? Who would have thought conversations about fashion would ever be preferable to talking to Monty? The impressive entrees of local seafood arrived, and Faith lifted her fork, savouring the creamy sauce and welcoming the task of eating. Kat appeared to have forgotten about poking holes in her fundraising efforts and was attempting to work her charms on Drew Noble. Faith didn't have the energy to feel sorry for him, and once she'd emptied her plate, she made her excuses. I'm sorry, everyone, I've got to make sure Adam's got everything he needs for the auction. Adam sat at a nearby table with Simone, Ruby, and Ryan. Monty pushed back his chair to follow. What are you doing? She hissed as he fell into step behind her. Helping you, he replied. I'm a doting boyfriend, remember? She snorted, unable to hold back. You're lucky I love your mum like she's my own, or there's no way I'd put up with this. Monty stood at the side of the hall, taking a breather while he surveyed Faith's handiwork. No one did fundraising better than country folks, but she'd exceeded expectations. Adam's auction had been an outstanding success, and the stalls were so busy that most of them had almost sold out of their wares. Everywhere he looked, happy faces greeted him, and the laughter in the hall gave the band a run for its money. A sense of friendship and community filled the air. If it weren't for the tension between him and Faith, he'd have been in his element. It wasn't just the farming that appealed to him about country life. It was also the small-town togetherness. He liked that he knew almost everyone by name, and that when people said, "How are you?" in the street, they actually meant it. "Hello, my darling," Jenny sidled up to Monty and wrapped an arm around his waist. "I'm having the best time. I've done 10 essence readings already. Thought I'd take a quick break. I must say you look very handsome tonight." He laughed and glanced down at his outfit. In the end, wearing a suit was the least of his worries. No matter how good he looked, Faith couldn't, or rather wouldn't, look him in the eye. He couldn't blame her, but that didn't stop him feeling like shit. Both my boys do. Monty turned slightly to see Will approaching with their dad and Pippa. He almost did a double take at Will clasping his girlfriend's hand. "Faith has done a good job tonight," Will said. "You are lucky to have her, and I am lucky to have Pippa. Monty felt as if he'd swallowed a live scorpion, but Pippa simply smiled sweetly. I would like to bring Pippa to see your new farm one day. Pippa nodded. Yes, Will has told me all about it. He's so proud of you. Monty didn't know what to say. The scorpion took a chunk out of his gut. Finally, he found his voice. That would be great. You're both welcome any time. Oh, look, the dancing started. Visibly excited, Jenny grabbed Stuart's hand. As she led her husband onto the dance floor, she called to Monty, I expect to see you and Faith out there too. Monty gave a quick nod and a smile, but hung back, merely watching as the crowds dispersed from the tables and stalls and began heading for the dance floor. His brother and Pippa were lingering, and he couldn't think of anything to say. Are you going to dance? He asked eventually. Once upon a time he'd never have asked such a question, but Will had been full of surprises this weekend. Pippa giggled and shook her head. There is no point to dancing, Will said, and being so close to so many people is an opportunity for the spread of germs. Of course. Monty nodded, somehow comforted by Will's explanation. At least the whole world hadn't gone totally topsy-turvy. I'm thirsty, Pippa announced. Me too. We're going to get a drink, Will told Monty. Then they headed through the tables towards the bar. Happy to be alone, Monty leaned back against the wall and watched. The band played another dog song, and the revellers looked to be having the time of their lives. Lack of space meant everyone was up close and personal. He hoped Jenny maybe wouldn't notice if he and Faith gave it a miss. But when he glanced across the room and saw Faith alone for the first time that evening, staring out onto the dance floor with the most miserable expression on her face, his chest ached. Unable to bear the thought that he was responsible, he crossed the room before he could think better of it. Let's dance, he said as he arrived in front of her. She shot him a perfected glare. People will expect it. But the truth was, he wanted to hold her, to feel her curves pressed against him and her wavy hair swishing against his arm. His departure loomed ahead like a nasty storm, and he realized this might be his last chance. She sighed as if contemplating the zillion other things she'd rather do with her time. Clean the toilet, swallow cod liver oil. But miraculously she stepped towards him and offered her hand. He took it gladly, feeling her warmth seep into his, and knowing that when he was gone he would miss her more than anything in the world. Sod's Law had it that they'd barely stepped onto the dance floor when the hip-hop music turned slow, romantic. Panic flashed across Faith's face, but she allowed him to draw her close. He slipped his arms around her waist, and her fingers brushed the skin at the back of his neck as she wrapped her arms around him. He felt her body tense as they swayed in time with the other people around them. Out of the corner of his eye he registered Ruby dancing with Adam, Simone with Ryan, and Kat pressed indecently against the new cop, but they all faded quickly into the background. He was holding Faith again. They'd spent only one night apart, but that one night had felt like an eternity in hell. He'd missed her more than he'd miss a limb. Was he insane, letting his hang-ups about Will and parenthood come between them? He found himself staring at her lips. The thought of never kissing them again hurt worse than someone telling him he had only a few days to live. Monty, don't. Her voice was low and threatening. She seemed to be holding her breath. He couldn't help himself. He dropped his head and pressed his lips against hers, taking what he wanted, not thinking about the consequences. She tasted so damn delicious, and for a few moments she seemed to acquiesce, letting him show her exactly what she meant to him, exactly what she did to him. But those seconds didn't last long enough. Instead of kissing him back, he felt her hands palming his chest as she pushed hard. His lips falling from hers, he stumbled backwards, not expecting such force. When he caught his balance and looked up, she was wiping her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Then she turned, and he copped a lovely view of her pert behind as she charged through the crowd. About to go after her, he felt an arm on his shoulder. "What's wrong with Faith?" Ryan asked. Along with half the town, he, Adam, Ruby and Simone had witnessed the whole fiasco. Their faces wore identical expressions of confusion and concern. None of them had a clue. A pain screwing into his forehead, Monty caught his head in his hands.
It's all such a fucked up mess. I better go after her.
Let me, Ruby said. From my vantage point, it didn't look like she'd want you following. He watched Ruby go, torn between following them and staying the hell away. He'd already made such a mess of his friendship with Faith. He didn't want to ruin her night anymore.
What have you done to my sister?
Ryan was in his face now, shouting above the noise. Adam raised his hand between them.
Leave it, Ryan. Let's all move off the dance floor.
Monty nodded. He couldn't help but notice the stares as he passed through the crowd. So much for their facade. Adam scored 2 beers from a passing waiter and led Monty to a table.
Care to tell me what's going on?
Monty took a long pull from his bottle, but didn't meet his friend's gaze.
Not really.
The men sat in silence, downing their drinks while the success of the night resumed all around them. Even with Faith and Ruby absent, everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves. With the auction over and the stalls wrapping up, it was all about the band and the dancing. Monty kept glancing towards the door that led to the restrooms. He could just imagine the conversation being had in there. He hadn't even asked Faith about the baby. After shutting him down early that morning, she hadn't given him the chance. Faith, what's going on? At Ruby's voice right behind her, Faith realised she should have found refuge somewhere other than the ladies' room.
I don't want to talk about it.
If she sounded like a sulky child, so be it. Turning the cold tap on full blast, she splashed water on her cheeks, not sparing one thought to the makeup Simone had applied earlier. Fine. Ruby leaned against the wall and folded her arms. Faith glanced over at the woman who'd gone from enemy to friend in the blink of an eye. All right, maybe she did want to talk about it. Maybe she wanted to whinge and complain and sulk and cry and rattle off each one of Monty's faults until she started to feel better.
I hate him, she sniffed. He told me he loved me and that he wanted me to move in with him, to buy furniture, hang my pictures on his wall. He said I could choose the bedspread, that we'd start a veggie patch, get a dog. He promised Daisy could move with us, that even when she stops providing milk, she could be a pet helping keep the lawn low, and then he took it all away.
She wiped her eyes and saw black mascara streaks all over her hands. Care factor, 0. Ruby wrapped an arm around Faith and drew her close. For someone tall and skinny, she felt incredibly comforting. And Faith found herself sobbing into Ruby's beautiful red dress.
Oh, God, I'm ruining your gown.
Don't worry about the gown. Ruby stroked Faith's hair back off her face and made shushing noises. It's you I'm worried about. Do you want to tell me why you suddenly hate Monty, or should I just go straight to ordering the voodoo doll? Faith half laughed.
He doesn't want children, she told Ruby. I thought I was pregnant, and he all but suggested I have an abortion. Turns out I'm not pregnant, but the bottom line is still the same. He can't make room in his life for a family.
Oh, Faith, are you sure you can't work it out? Compromise? Faith snorted.
There's no sitting on the fence where kids are involved. You can't half have them. But I'm so scared I'll never find anyone else that I love as much as him. Am I stupid to put kids that don't even exist before a chance at happily ever after?
Ruby rubbed her lips together for a few long moments. Eventually she said, Only you can answer that. But perhaps you need some time. All I know is that you need to be true to yourself. Relationships never work if one person is losing self for the other.
You sound like you're speaking from experience,
Faith said, realising Ruby still hadn't told her the whole story about her broken relationship. I am. But that's a story for another night. We'll need wine and lots of chocolate.
I'll hold you to that. But right now, I suppose I'd better go out and face the music.
Ruby helped Faith fix her makeup, and when they returned to the main hall, the last song of the night, Who Let the Dogs Out, was playing. That was Faith's cue to take the stage again. Like a blinkered horse, she walked to her destination without a sideways glance. Monty kept out of Faith's way until only a few volunteers lingered in the hall. He'd already been confronted by his parents, who'd seen his and Faith's display on the dance floor and demanded answers, and was in no hurry to go home. Simone left to get home to her girls, and Adam saved Drew from Katerina's drunken advances and escorted her back to the cottage. This left Ruby, Ryan, Faith and Monty to lock up. Ruby and Ryan shadowed Faith like lion parents protecting their cub. But if they thought he was leaving without talking to her, they had another think coming. "Thanks for your help tonight, Monty. You can go now." Faith addressed him as if he were a stranger, not meeting his gaze as she gave him the brush off.
"We need to talk."
He folded his arms and planted his feet against the polished floor, not making any moves towards the door.
"I'm too tired. This won't take long."
He looked to Ruby and Ryan.
"Can you two give us a moment, please?"
Ruby looked set to refuse. "No way," Ryan said at the same time, but Faith interrupted. "It's okay. May as well get this over with." "I'll check the lights are off in the restrooms." Ruby relented. "Keep me company, Ryan." Monty waited until Ruby and Ryan's shoes click-clacked right across the wooden floors, and then spoke low.
"Shall we sit?"
I thought this wasn't going to take long. The urge to reach out and hold her was almost unbearable, but her body language told him it wouldn't be appreciated.
"Okay. Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for tonight. My only defense is that whatever my faults, I do love you, and I couldn't help myself."
She shook her head, her brow furrowed in fury. "Please don't say things like that."
"Did you do a pregnancy test?"
She held her chin high. "Not yet, but I told you, put it out of your mind. You don't want to be a father, and if I am having a baby, then that baby deserves more. No father is better than a bad one."
"Geez, Faith, you really know how to make a bloke feel like crap."
"What can you tell me otherwise? Have you come to your senses overnight?" He wanted to say he had, but the thought of having a child, all that responsibility and potential for disaster, made his pulse spike.
"I've thought about nothing else. I love you, Faith, and if you're having a baby, then I'm sure I'll learn to love it too."
"Don't you get it, Monty?" She sighed, her expression one of sadness and pity. "You're not supposed to learn to love a child. You're meant to want it more than anything in the world. From the moment it's conceived, you should be prepared to lay down your life for that child. But you wouldn't even be willing to sell your property if need be. And that means you're not the person I thought you were. I wish you the best with the new farm and with your life." She glanced past him, as if hoping to see the others coming back. In her posh frock and cold stance, she appeared like a stranger.
"So that's it. End of 30 years friendship."
He couldn't believe she could throw it all away like that.
"You hate me that much?"
"I don't hate you, Monty. For some crazy reason, I'm madly in love with you. And that's why it has to be this way." She paused a moment, pursing her lips. Her chest rose and fell slowly, as if it were a real effort to speak. "Just being friends with you now would hurt too damn much." And then she did something he didn't expect. She leaned forward, stretched up, and kissed him on the cheek. "Goodbye, Daniel. And by the way, I'm not pregnant." As Faith turned and walked away, relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. He'd lost his best friend over a non-existent baby, all because of one night and 1 week. It was the best sex of his life. But had it been worth it? Faith meant so much more to him than that. Chapter 29. More than happy to close the door on the day, Faith had just slid beneath the covers when her mobile started ringing on her bedside table. She eyed it suspiciously, wondering who could be calling at such an hour. Of course, curiosity and the stupid hope that Monty had experienced a life-changing epiphany got the better of her. Picking up the phone, she groaned when she saw Kat's caller ID. Could her day possibly get any worse? "Hello," she said with a sigh. "Oh, my God, Faith, I'm terrified. I heard noises outside and now I'm sure there's someone walking around inside. I've locked myself in the bathroom. This damn cottage doesn't have a lock on the front door, but thank God the bathroom does. I've tried to ring Adam, but his number is unavailable." "Katerina, relax. I'm sure it's just a possum or something. I'll try his home number." Faith sat up, trying to reassure her. Actually, stuff that, I'll be over myself in 5 minutes. No way she'd get any sleep tonight anyway, so no point in both her and Adam being exhausted tomorrow. Try to stay calm.
Can you stay on the line? Kat begged. That way if I start screaming you can call Constable Noble as well.
For a second, Faith wondered if this was Kat's ploy to get Drew to rescue her. You'd have to have been dead to have missed the way she was flirting with him that evening, but surely she'd have called 000 straight away if that was the plan. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Climbing out of bed, she put the phone on the bedside table while she threw a jumper over her pyjamas and yanked on her boots. If there was an intruder, he'd chosen the wrong night to mess with Faith Forrester. Still fuming over her fight with Monty, she wouldn't be afraid to attack if Kat really was under threat. It would actually be cathartic to have someone to take her anger out on. She picked up the phone again. I'm just getting a torch, and then I'll be on my way.
Hurry,
Kat pleaded. At the last minute, Faith decided to also grab her dad's gun. She was fairly certain the intruder was a figment of Kat's overactive city imagination, but it didn't hurt to be prepared. 10 minutes later, she slowed her four-wheel drive and dimmed the lights as she headed up the Burtons' long gravel drive. She had to pass the main homestead and Adam's new house to get to the cottage. The usual prickles tickled her neckline as she crossed the dark property. Maybe Kat had picked up on the same weird vibes. Scratching her neck and trying to forget the unease she felt whenever she visited Annandale, she picked up speed past the homestead, and in less than a minute the cottage came into view. All right, I'm here, she comforted Kat down the phone line. The surrounding paddocks were pitch black, and it would be hard to see if anyone was actually lingering around outside. Feeling braver than usual, Faith stopped the car, grabbed the gun off the passenger seat, and got out. She disconnected her phone, slid it into her pocket, and stomped up the path, gun at the ready, hopefully giving off a don't mess with me message to potential intruders. As she climbed the steps to the porch, she scanned left and right. Although she was a little jumpy, she didn't register anything suspicious. Kat, she called as she pushed open the front door. It's Faith. I'm checking the house, then I'm coming to get you. Turning lights on as she went, Faith searched the lounge room, the kitchen, the laundry, and the 2 bedrooms. It wasn't a big house, before rapping on the bathroom door. There's nobody here. You can come out. After a few seconds, Faith heard Kat turning the lock, before cautiously opening the door. When she peered around the edge of the door, her face was as white as a ghost. Her bloodshot eyes suggested she'd been crying. It's all right, Faith said, her heart softening at the realization Kat was just as human as the next person. I'll stay with you tonight, but let's see if we can find something to make a warm drink with first. Come on. Still sniffling, Kat followed Faith out into the kitchen, her head constantly darting about, checking for shadows. Are you sure you didn't see anything outside? Nothing. Faith located the kettle and everything necessary to make hot chocolate, not surprisingly, since Ruby had also helped Mrs. Burton stock the cottage. I've never been so terrified in my life. How old is this place? Could it be haunted? Faith smothered a laugh. I doubt that. Probably just country noises. Could have been a possum. They've been the cause of many broken nights. Really? Kat plonked herself down on a kitchen chair. I feel like an idiot. Sorry for waking you up. It's okay, I hadn't got to sleep yet, Faith admitted, joining Kat at the table while they waited for the kettle to boil. Things on my mind. Kat nodded as if she understood. I'm sorry to hear about you and Daniel. You looked like the perfect couple. Faith raised one eyebrow. Looks can be deceiving. Tell me about it. I thought I had a faithful, sweet and loving husband. Turned out he was none of the above. What? Faith couldn't hide her shock. Kat let out a half laugh and shrugged one shoulder. My marriage. It's a debacle. Paul cheated on me, but somehow I'm the one in the wrong. The kids are barely out of nappies and they all want to live with him because he buys them better presents. I can't afford to keep up. I quit work so he could further his career. While Faith made hot chocolate, Kat spilled her woes, as if Faith were her long-time best friend. They drank and talked, and as she listened, Faith began to reassess her own situation. It was another wake-up call about judging people. Yes, she was heartbroken. Sure, she'd lost her best friend in the world, but there were plenty of people worse off than her. Imagine if she had been pregnant and had someday had to tell her son or daughter that the reason Daddy wasn't around was because he hadn't wanted them. I guess we'll both recover eventually, Kat said with a sigh. And I suppose we should try and get some sleep as well. Yeah, you're probably right. Faith stood, collected their mugs, and dumped them in the sink. Will you be okay if I sleep on the couch, or do you want me to drag a mattress into your room? I'll be fine. Kat sounded as if she were trying to convince herself. Don't worry, I'm physically exhausted, but emotionally wide awake. Faith gestured to the gun on the table. No one will get past us. Thanks. And Faith? Between you and me, the ball was outstanding. I know you haven't got a final total yet, but I believe you'll be pleasantly surprised by how much you've raised. I think you stand a real chance at winning. Faith smiled as Kat turned and headed back towards the bedroom. Although she was pleased that the ball had been a success, it was hard to enjoy the happiness such a thought deserved. Looking back, it had never been about winning, but rather doing something meaningful with her life. Hopefully her efforts tonight would mean a lot to a family with an autistic child, who might now be able to get a dog. Locating a couple of thick blankets in one of the cupboards, she settled on the couch. She didn't expect to get any sleep at all, so when she woke to the sound of an approaching ute and saw the sun shining in through the gap in the curtains, Faith was surprised at how late it was. She leapt off the couch, dumping the blankets on the floor as Adam knocked, entering before waiting for a reply. "What are you doing here?" he asked, eyeing her suspiciously. Faith yawned, stretched, and rubbed her eyes. She needed coffee, and fast. "Protecting your guest." "Huh?" She gave him a condensed version of the night's events. "Haunted?" Adam looked genuinely concerned. "You don't think Uncle Tom is annoyed we've done over his place and has come back to spook it, do you?" "We both know I don't believe in ghosts." Faith squeezed Adam's arm and whispered, lest their guest hear, "Look, I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't think Kat spent too many nights alone in the bush before. It was probably a possum." "I hope you're right. I'd hate for rumours of a ghost to ruin my plans for this place." "You know what?" Faith said. "I reckon rumours of a ghost might not be a bad thing. Lots of people are interested in stuff like that. They'd come specifically in the hope of getting a sighting of Annandale's resident ghost." "You think?" She nodded. "I do. Either way, I wouldn't lose sleep over it." "Yeah, I suppose so." Adam puffed out a breath. At that moment, Kat appeared behind them. "Oh, good morning, Adam. I suppose Faith told you about my embarrassing attempts to scare myself to death last night." Adam chuckled. Sorry you couldn't reach me." "It's fine, I was just being silly." She glanced between Adam and Faith. "Would you like me to make you a cuppa? Then I'd better be on my way." "Not for me, thanks." Faith sat again to shove her feet into her boots. "I've got to get stuck into the clean-up anyway. Thanks for coming, and safe travels." As she gathered her car keys, phone, torch, and gun, Adam said, "Are you okay? That looked like a pretty serious disagreement between you and Monty last night." "I'm fine." He raised his eyebrows, and she knew she hadn't fooled him one bit. "We broke up," she answered simply. "Irreconcilable differences, and no, I don't want to talk about it." That was all anyone was going to get from her. Never one to push things, Adam escorted her to her four-wheel drive. "I'll be down later to help. And Faith, I'm here if you need me. Always." "Thanks, Adam. You're a great mate." Faith arrived at the hall to find a crew of willing volunteers already getting into the clean-up. Frank and Stuart were removing the tables, and Jenny was wielding a mop up on the stage. But Monty was noticeably absent. Although she'd made it clear last night she didn't want to see him, she couldn't help the disappointment in her gut any more than she could help loving him with all her heart. Lost in her thoughts, she didn't notice Jenny come down from the stage and cross the hall, but she recognised her tender embrace as it pulled her close. "I'm sorry Daniel has hurt you." If the hug wasn't bad enough, Jenny's gentle words threatened to unravel all the hard work Faith was doing trying to hold herself together. "You mean the world to me, and I don't want you to shut yourself off from us simply because you and Daniel have some things to work through." "Bless Jenny. I don't think we can work through this one." "He told me," whispered Jenny. "He told me you might be pregnant and that he hadn't factored fatherhood into his future. If it's any comfort, his announcement surprised me too. I think he'd make the perfect father." "Oh, Faith hadn't expected Monty to offer that information freely, even to his mum. I've been waiting for something bad to happen since I dreamed about the raven in the tea leaves, but I didn't expect this. Jenny shook her head sadly. I can't help feeling partly responsible. Did he tell you why? Of course he didn't. He's a man, he probably doesn't know the whole reason himself, but I'm a mother and I haven't thought about anything else all night. I see. I'm guessing it's got something to do with Will. She paused and rubbed her lips together, as if in standing up for one son she might be doing an injustice to another. I know Daniel loves his brother, but life wasn't easy growing up with him. Daniel has always been such a strong person, but all the sacrifices he made for Will have taken their toll. My guess is he's scared. Scared he'll have a child like his brother. Yes. Faith nodded, her anger at Monty sparking once again. He's selfish. He can't see that Will and me and any children we might have are more important than possessions, than farms. Please don't hate him for that, Faith. Life's not always so clear-cut. It's partly my fault, and for that I'm sorry. Maybe I spent too much time with Will and... Jenny sighed. No. Faith rushed to reassure her friend, putting her hand on Jenny's arm in a show of support. You were a fabulous mother. Don't ever question that. Monty didn't miss out. He had a great life. If he can't realise that, it's his problem, not yours. But it's yours too, Jenny said simply, because you love him. Faith wanted to deny it, but her brain refused to send the signal to her mouth. Jenny took her hand and squeezed it gently. I'll be praying he comes to his senses, but I want you to know that Stuart and I will be here for you no matter what. If you are pregnant, we'll be proud to be grandparents. Jenny's kind words and warm hug had tears forming in Faith's eyes, and so she pulled back. She needed to tell Jenny there was no baby, but the moment she said it out loud, it would be real. She'd no longer have any tangible connection to Monty or his family. Thanks, Jenny, she managed. But luckily for Monty, it was a false alarm. I'm sorry. You're not going to be a grandma just yet. Oh, I see. Jenny tried to cover her disappointment, but Faith, feeling her own deep in the pit of her heart, recognised the shared emotion. I mean it, Faith. Don't nurse your broken heart alone. I'm only at the other end of the phone line. But somehow Faith knew she needed to learn to get by without the Montgomerys. Words were one thing, but in the end, blood was thicker than water. To try to take her mind off Monty, she threw all her energies into the clean-up. Keeping busy didn't annihilate the pain or make her forget, but it had to be better than sitting around wallowing. She didn't need Jenny's tea leaves to see much baking and hard manual labour on her horizon. Mid-afternoon, when the hall looked as if it had never been used at all, Ryan, Ruby and Adam tried to cajole her into a few drinks at the pub, but she turned them down. One day she'd be ready to face the world again, but today was not that day. As she drove out of town on her way back to Forrester's Rock, she couldn't help but slow slightly while passing Monty's place. She stared blankly at the empty driveway, the blinds pulled all the way down, and the front gate shut for the first time in all the years he'd lived there. She fought back tears. It all added up to one thing. Monty had left Bunyip Bay already. And this time he wouldn't be back. Chapter 30. Monty pulled over at the entrance to Clancy's breakaway and stared up at the old welcome sign, trying to summon some of the enthusiasm he'd felt the first time he'd laid eyes on it. This was it. After years of toiling hard, sacrificing luxuries and skipping holidays to put money in the bank, his dream was reality. Every square centimetre of the 800-hectare property belonged to him. Well, him and the bank, but as long as he worked hard and paid his mortgage, it was his. So what was wrong? He told himself that once he'd had a shower and a good night's sleep, he'd be ready to get stuck into work. The long drive had fatigued him. Getting sweaty on his own property was exactly what he needed to pull him out of this slump. He'd called Tim and Nora first thing that morning and accepted their invitation to arrive a few days early. He looked forward to spending a few days with Tim, learning the ropes, before the older couple moved on. Part of him couldn't wait to see them, but the other part dreaded their inevitable questions about Faith. With a sigh, he took his foot off the brake, drove under the welcome sign and over the cattle grid. He'd have to get the sign changed, although his name alone would look lost up there. Forcing that depressing thought aside, he continued ahead, reacquainting himself with the lay of the land. In the paddock to his right, the cattle looked up from gnawing on feed and eyed him warily, as if they knew he wasn't qualified to look after them. After a kilometre or so, the homestead came into view, and his pulse quickened at the sight. Atop a hill much greener than the ones back in Bunyip Bay, the large house, with its splendidly wide verandas, appeared more magnificent than he remembered. Tim and Nora had obviously tidied the garden and surrounds ready for the handover. He slowed the ute, parked, and had barely slammed the door before Tim and Nora were upon him. "It's so fabulous to see you again," Nora called as she bustled down the cobbled path towards him, an apron once again wrapped around her waist. "Where's Faith?" He swallowed. "She's coming later. She had things to tie up in Bunyip Bay first." He wasn't proud of the lie, but when push came to shove, the truth hurt too damn much. "Oh, that's a pity." Nora looked deflated, but she seized Monty in a hearty hug nevertheless. "I was looking forward to seeing her before we left."
"Leave the poor bloke alone, Nora." Tim offered his hand to shake Monty's. "He's obviously gutted to have left her behind. Let's not rub salt in his wounds."
Monty wondered if Tim guessed he wasn't telling the whole truth, but maybe that was simply paranoia.
"You've been busy,"
he said, gesturing to the tidy veranda and front yard, now free of all Nora's gnomes and other ceramic knickknacks. Close up, the garden didn't have the same appeal without them.
"We knew you'd have your hands full," chortled Tim. "The least we could do was make sure you didn't have to worry about the house or garden for a while." "Thanks, I appreciate it."
"Well, let's not stand around jibber-jabbing." Nora clapped her hands together. "Help Monty unload his stuff, then let's get inside and eat. You must be starving after such a long drive." There wasn't much to unload. He'd thrown only his clothes and the basics in the back that morning. Everything else was packed away in boxes ready for the truck on Tuesday. Mrs. O'Neill, bless her Anzac cooking soul, had agreed to let the removalists in, supervise the removal of his limited furniture, and do a thorough clean when they were gone. He tried to pay her, but she wouldn't hear of it. Not allowing himself the chance to look back, he'd fled Bunyip Bay a couple of days earlier than planned. Now there was nothing to do except look to the future. After 3 days of intensive instruction from Tim, Monty waved the old couple goodbye. He was both happy and sad to see them go. Glad because he felt more than ready to start this new phase of his life. Sad because he'd missed their company. During the next few weeks he did nothing but work. He barely had time for eating and sleeping, never mind thinking. He fetched supplies in town, met his neighbours, a crotchety old couple on one side, a young couple with 2 hyperactive kids on the other, signed up for the local volunteer fire brigade, and met the local vet, Ava. He was red-blooded enough to acknowledge she was gorgeous, but all he could think about was how well she and Faith would have got on. Ava gave him some cattle advice and put him in touch with a nearby farmer who had a Kelpie pup to sell. He named the dog Rooster because his bark sounded a bit like a chicken's call, and he woke long before the sun every morning. Finally, he hired a keen 18-year-old who just happened to have experience with cattle to help him round the farm. The boy was the youngest of 4 sons of a local farmer, and there was no work for him on his own family property. Monty recognised a bit of himself in the hard-working teenager, who also spoke about one day buying his own farm. They often shared a beer at the end of a hard day's work. The days were hectic. If he wasn't busy with the cattle, he was doing fencing repairs and other property improvements. But at night, the place echoed with the emptiness. Never one to spend idle hours watching TV in the past, he now had the blasted box on all the time, just to fill the silence. Rooster was pretty good company, but the one-way conversations grew dull after a while. He'd taken to watching ghastly reality shows about people who couldn't sing or dance, trying to prove they could. On those quiet nights, his thoughts always drifted to Bunyip Bay. He picked up the phone numerous times to ring Faith, but always put it down again. He spoke to Adam once, and his mum a couple of times, and although they tried to be enthusiastic, the calls never lasted long. He didn't ask about Faith, nor did they mention her, which left giant silences in the conversation. Early one evening, about a month after his arrival, the phone rang and Monty all but pounced on it. "Hello?" "Hi, sweetheart. How you doing down there?" "Oh, hi, Mum. I'm good." Settling back on the couch, he picked up the remote and switched off the television. He could find out who got kicked off the X Factor later. "We've just finished ear tagging the calves, and they're all growing really well. I've been reading up about the weaning process, because we'll have to start that in a few months." He babbled on about every tiny thing he'd done that week, dancing around the one thing he really wanted to know: whether Jenny had heard from Faith lately. "That's so great, honey. I'm pleased it's working out so well for you down there." "Thanks, Mum. And what about you? Anything new in the Montgomery household?" He put his feet up on the crate he still used as a coffee table. He and Faith had talked about buying furniture from Albany, but he hadn't been able to bring himself to make that trip alone. "Not really. Same old, and that suits me just fine." She paused a moment. "Listen, honey, I'm not sure how you'll feel about this, but Will would like to bring Pippa down to you for a visit." "Great, I'd love to see you all." He was immensely excited about the idea of showing his family around his property, playing host. "That's the thing. They want to come by themselves." His smile drooped. "Really?" "Yep. We've looked into it, and there's a bus that comes into Mount Barker." "I know it, but are you sure it's a good idea? It's a long trip." Will's social skills tutor had taught him how to navigate the bus in Perth, but he had always hated long-distance journeys in a car. How would he cope being confined on a bus for that long with a bunch of strangers? And what if something wasn't to his liking down here and he'd totally lost it? Monty hadn't had to deal with anything like that in years. The panic rose in his chest. "Darling, Will's come a long way since you lived with us. He catches the bus with Pippa all the time. I'll drop them off in Perth, and you'll be there to pick them up in Mount Barker. Simple. I'll give them a list of towns to tick off on their way. They'll love that." "Okay. I'd love to see them." He realised he actually meant it. "But you'll have to email me a checklist to make sure I've got everything sorted for them down here." "He doesn't want that." "What?" "Daniel Will wants to live a normal life. He knows he's different and he likes being different. But he also wants to learn to deal with things outside his comfort zone," his mum explained. "Just do exactly what you do for any other guest and enjoy their company." At her emphasis on the word enjoy, he wondered if she'd guessed how lonely he felt down here. "Have you heard from Faith lately?" The question almost slipped out, but he held it back at the last moment. What if she told him something he didn't want to hear? Like Faith hadn't spared a moment's thought since he'd left, and had revived her mission to find herself a man. What if she'd been successful? The microwave pie he'd had for dinner swirled in his stomach at the thought. "All right. Let me know when they've booked a ticket and I'll be at the bus stop." "Thanks, honey." She paused, but the tone in those 2 words told him there was more to come, something he might not want to hear. "I know it wasn't always easy on you having Will as a brother." She paused again. "But he is, really lucky to have you. Don't let the past dictate your future." "You need to put more oomph into your throws. Remember you're a team, not 7 individuals battling it out against 7 other individuals." Faith smiled as she gave her girls a pre-training pep talk, and their enthusiastic faces smiled back. Funny how your world could fall apart at the seams, yet life around you continued on as normal. Daisy, surprisingly, still needed her daily milking sessions. Her netball girls, amazingly, were undefeated so far this season, and life on the farm, blessedly, was as non-confrontational as it had been in a long time. Her father was finally talking about taking a holiday, and he and Ryan had not only been encouraging her to do more farm work, but actually seeking her out and requesting help. Despite all this, life without Monty took some getting used to. "Okay, 5 laps around the netball courts, and then we'll get stuck into some real training." As the girls charged off towards the other end of the court, Faith turned at the sound of footsteps behind her and waved at Ruby approaching from the car park. Where once she might have assumed Ruby was coming to try and poach her girls for horse riding lessons, now she welcomed her friend. "Hey." "Hi there." Ruby nodded towards the girls and patted her flat stomach. "Maybe I should train with them. All those treats you've been feeding me are starting to take effect." Faith forced a laugh. Ruby wasn't the only one complaining about her baking efforts. The local IGA had had to up their flour supplies. Her home freezer had enough cakes and biscuits to see the Foresters through 3 harvests and seeding seasons. Dad had mentioned buying an additional freezer, and Ryan reckoned that if his girth grew any more, they'd also need a larger harvester to accommodate him in a few months' time. Faith couldn't help it. Cooking was the only thing that gave her any comfort, but no amount of baking could fill the massive hole in her heart. "What are you up to?" she asked Ruby, hoping her friend wasn't going to try to convince her to head to the palace after training. It just wasn't the same without Monty. And although Ruby had made more than a few mentions of the other fish in the sea, Faith wasn't ready to go there. "Actually, I've come to ask you a favour." Ruby adjusted the flower in her hair. As the girls passed by on their first lap, Ruby and Faith claimed one of the benches that bordered the courts. "Go on." Faith tried to keep the dread out of her voice. "Since you did such a fabulous job with the barking ball, I was wondering if you'd like to help me organise the undies run." They'd raised an impressive $21,000, and although Faith wasn't sure that would put her in the contest-winning stakes, it would be a valuable contribution to the charity. And really, that's what mattered. "Is it that time of year again?" "Uh-huh," Ruby nodded. "And some of the ladies who have been on the committee for years want to take a step back. I had so much fun helping you that I thought maybe I could offer my services for this as well. Beats sitting around watching bad television every night." Faith didn't want to crush Ruby's enthusiasm, but the Undies Run, held each year on the weekend of the famous Bunyip Festival, was a big deal. It raised crucial money for the hospital auxiliary, and she didn't know if she was the right person for the job in her current state of mind. Likely Ruby was only asking her to give her something else to focus on anyway. "I'll think about it," she promised. "That's all I ask." Ruby smiled and looked back to the court. "Now, do you need any help with these girls? I could take some of them to the other end for some one-on-one training if you'd like." "Thanks, that'd be fantastic." As the girls came round again, Faith stood. Ruby had been such a great friend since Monty left, and Faith had been about as fun as an infectious disease. She hoped she wouldn't stay in this funk forever, but nothing she'd tried thus far had worked to get her out. Everything she put her mind to reminded her of Monty. Every movie held memories of watching it with him, unless she resorted to romantic comedies, but quite aside from her lifetime distaste, they came with their own issues. If she took a walk across the farm, every little hill and tree reminded her of some mischief they'd got up to as children. Even here on the netball courts, which doubled as tennis courts in summer, her mind flashed with times they'd played sport together. Many a night she tried to recall the time when Monty didn't feature in her life, but that was impossible. "Okay, girls, time's up," she shouted across the courts. "Enough wallowing. Ruby has been kind enough to offer to help us today, so I think we'll divide into a couple of groups." As with everything Ruby did, she turned out to be an excellent netball player and a patient and talented coach. With both Faith and Ruby instructing them, the girls trained hard and finished even more enthused for their Saturday game. Afterwards, Ruby helped Faith collect the netballs and lock them away in the sports pavilion. "Thanks for letting me help. It was so much fun. Now what say we treat ourselves to dinner and a drink at the pub? Promise it won't be a late one." How could she refuse after all Ruby had done? "Okay, you finally got me. Dinner and 1 drink." Ruby smiled like she'd just convinced her to hand over her life savings, and Faith made a silent vow to at least pretend to enjoy the few hours ahead. "They're the talk of the town right now. No one can believe how quickly Constable Noble cottoned on to them," Frankie said, making elaborate gestures with her hands. Faith twisted her bottle of beer round and round as she tried to feign interest in the conversation. It sounded like Frankie from the cafe had her eye on the new cop, and that half the town were also smitten. The latest on the grapevine was that their new English lawman had busted 2 teens from good local families for a string of crimes around town. Ruby, who didn't usually indulge in gossip, took another sip of her wine. "Their parents must be ropeable, but Drew obviously knows his stuff. We can all feel a lot safer knowing he's in town." Faith raised her eyebrow at the use of his first name, but none of the women seemed to notice.
Amen.
Frankie lifted her glass of rum and coke.
I, for one, sleep better at night knowing he's not too far away.
Ruby giggled in response. Faith tried to summon a smile, but the conversation had moved on by the time her lips even began to lift. She didn't understand the fascination with Drew Noble. Sure, he looked good in a uniform, and his killer smile had the power to knock some women sideways, but it wasn't like they weren't equally good-looking men in these parts. She put it down to his accent.
What's all this laughter about?
Adam arrived at the table with a pint of beer and plonked himself down between Frankie and Ruby. They burst into giggles again, and Adam looked to Faith for clarification. She shrugged and took another pull of her beer. Even if she wanted to fill him in, she'd only taken in part of what the girls were saying, because, as usual, her heart and mind were elsewhere. As if sensing they were losing her, Adam tried to drag her into conversation.
So I hear your dad might be going on a holiday soon.
Uh-huh. She nodded and took another gulp of beer. Empty plates sat on the table in front of them, and her one drink was almost gone. She couldn't wait to escape. Part of her wished she could do a better job at feigning happiness, but her friends were trying to act as if life was normal when everything had changed for her. No one had mentioned Monty in almost 4 weeks. It was as if he'd never even existed. They'd avoided the topic for her benefit, but she desperately wanted to know if anyone had heard from him. She didn't think Ruby had, but surely Adam would have called or exchanged emails. So everyone, Faith's agreed to help me organise the undies run, Ruby announced, smiling in Faith's direction.
That's fabulous.
Frankie did a little jig in her seat.
I love the undies run.
Faith tried her best, but it was hard to get enthusiastic. She felt like a badly made jumper, ready to unravel at the slightest tug of a loose thread. She wondered how long her friends would persist with trying to draw her back into their circle. They chose their topics carefully, mindful not to speak about anything that might upset her. Maybe they'd eventually give up, and she'd end up like Esther Burton, holed up on the farm, sending other people out to do her shopping, and only attempting to socialise on the odd occasion when people tried to visit her. She found the idea depressingly appealing. This is the end of CD 8. The book continues on CD 9. CD 9. Chapter 31. On Friday afternoon, Monty waited at the Mount Barker bus stop, squinting every time a vehicle came into view. With 10 minutes to go until the scheduled arrival time, he paced back and forth, unable to keep still. He'd been restless ever since his mum had told him he was going to have visitors. Part of him couldn't wait for the company, but the other part of him worried about the responsibility. He'd spent the day vacuuming his house, so no such noise needed to pollute the place during Will and Pippa's stay. Even though Jenny had assured him Will was past it, he didn't want to risk either of them melting down while in his care. He'd never before spent 2 days with Will without his parents around. They had spent precious little time together at all during the last few years. "It's coming." A woman in her early 70s hobbled forward and waved her hand excitedly towards the road. She looked as if she was waiting for grandchildren. Monty stilled and followed her gaze as the Trans-WA bus loomed into view. Car doors slammed as people who'd been waiting in the car park got out to meet the bus. Everyone jostled for a spot closest to where the bus would pull in. Not normally the type to push through crowds, Monty planted his feet, not wanting to be pushed out of the way. The moment Will and Pippa got off, he wanted them to see him. No room for panic from anyone. The bus pulled into the stop and the doors peeled back, squeaking a little, as if they needed to be oiled. He glanced down the windows, scanning the full bus for Will and Pippa. People disembarked, rushing forward to meet friends or relatives. With each face that wasn't Will's or Pippa's, Monty's pulse raced a little more. His mum had called him after waving off the bus in Perth, so they had to be here. But doubt crept into his mind. Could something have happened on the way? They were adults, he told himself. They might struggle with certain social situations and sometimes have difficulty functioning in the normal world, but they were probably smarter than everyone on the bus put together. Thanks to their parents' dedication to helping them adapt to a normal life, they'd progressed beyond expectation. He shook himself as another person stepped off the bus.
What would I be like if I had children? Constantly stressing about what might go wrong?
And then they were there. Pippa's smile placid and Will's expression serious as they helped each other down the steps. The air rushed back into Monty's lungs as he stepped forward to greet them.
"Will, Pippa," he called, "over here."
Relief flashed on Will's face as he located Monty in the now dwindling crowd. He lifted a hand to wave. His other one held Pippa's tightly. Monty felt an uncharacteristic wave of emotion wash over him at the sight of them together, and he thought of his mum's declaration of happiness that Will had found the type of relationship she'd never imagined possible for him.
"How are you? Good trip?" he asked as they stood by the side of the bus waiting for the driver to unload their bags.
"We didn't fall," Will said, and then he closed his eyes and shook his head. He looked to Pippa. He meant the journey. She nodded, and they smiled as if sharing an in-joke.
"Yes, the journey," Monty said. "Was it a good one?"
"Oh, yes," Pippa nodded. "The scenery was lovely, and we spotted some rare birds as we passed through Codgenup."
"Awesome."
Monty took Pippa's bag as Will picked up his own.
"I'm so glad you decided to come. The Utes this way."
Will and Pippa squished in next to Monty for the 20-kilometre drive to Clancy's breakaway. He tried to make conversation.
"Is there anything particular you would like to see or do this weekend? I could take you into Albany, or we could go farther afield and do the treetop walk at the Valley of the Giants."
"We just want to hang on the farm," Will said. "See your animals, take some walks. We'd like to have a bonfire one night."
"We can do that."
Monty had found a place between a few large gum trees, not far from the house, that looked to be perfect for a bonfire. But there hadn't been any point going to all that effort for only one person.
"I think I even have some marshmallows somewhere."
"This is Pippa's first time on a farm, and it may as well be mine too for all I can remember of ours when I was a kid," Will announced.
"But Will's told me all the stories you told him about life on the land, and we can't wait to experience it for ourselves,"
Pippa added, her tone excited. Their statements surprised Monty. He'd never once imagined that Will might have felt he had missed out by not living on the family farm. But now that fact seemed odd in itself. Of course Will would have missed it. He loved everything to do with nature. His guests asked questions as he drove, and Monty tried to answer them the best he could. Conversation was surprisingly easy, and he found his anxieties about having them stay for the weekend easing. Back at the farm, Rooster bounded towards the ute at their approach.
"That's my new dog."
"He won't bite, will he?"
Pippa looked anxious.
"No, Rooster's really friendly."
Stepping out of the car, Monty called him and grabbed onto his collar.
"But he's only a pup, and he has a tendency to get overexcited."
"Can I pat him?"
Pippa asked, the tension easing in her expression.
"Sure."
Monty nodded, still gripping Rooster's collar.
"He'd like that."
Pippa stepped tentatively forward, reached out, and barely touched the top of Rooster's head. The pup bounced as much as it could while still being restrained.
"He's cute,"
she said with a smile. Will reached out and ruffled Rooster's fur. "Mum thinks we should get a dog."
"They make good companions,"
Monty said, although inwardly he was thinking that Will had far better company in his girlfriend.
"Anyway, let's go inside."
He gave them the grand tour. It felt odd, but nice. The last time he'd taken a tour of the house, he'd been the guest. Now, for the first time since Nora and Tim had left, it almost felt like a home. They shared a late afternoon tea of packet biscuits, nothing compared to Faith's culinary delights, on the veranda looking out over the property, then decided on a game of Scrabble. Pippa whipped both their butts before Monty announced he'd better organise some dinner. Maybe later he'd dig out Trivial Pursuit. Hot dogs were the main component of the menu, but neither Will nor Pippa seemed upset by the simplicity of what he cooked. Afterwards they offered to wash up, and he found himself watching them from the kitchen table, where he sat drinking a beer. Although they'd been perfect guests all evening, he suddenly felt like a third wheel. Will and Pippa spoke in low voices, laughing together, and even throwing soap suds at each other. Once upon a time, Will would have shrieked the house down if someone had dared to do such a thing to him. He'd barely let their parents wash his hair until he was well into his teens. But things had changed. Monty had to admit his brother had come a very long way. On Saturday, Monty's guests shadowed him as he went about his daily tasks on the farm. They rotated some of the stock to optimise feeding conditions. Then, after a hearty lunch of soup and bread from the local bakery, they worked together to build a bonfire. By the time it was dark enough to light their creation, Monty didn't know who was more excited, himself or Pippa and Will. The three of them carried supplies, including the all-important marshmallows, down to the bonfire site and set themselves up on folding camping chairs. "Don't get too close," Will warned Pippa. He frowned at the monument of branches and sticks as Monty walked around lighting it, then took her hand and urged her back a little. Again, something inside Monty twisted at his brother's gentle concern for another human being. Pippa nodded, and the three of them stood back to watch the flames catch on.
"I've never roasted marshmallows before,"
Pippa said, when Monty ripped open the first packet. "It's easy," he promised. Searching about on the ground, Monty scooped up 3 sticks and handed one to each of his guests. Will examined his stick and snapped a little off the end to make it straighter.
"What do we do?"
Pippa stared at her own stick like it was an alien space probe. Monty opened his mouth to explain, but Will took over, plucking a marshmallow from the bag in Monty's hand and shoving it onto the end of his stick. "You make sure the marshmallow is secured and that your stick is long enough, and then you let it hover in the flames." Scrunching his face up in deep concentration, Will sort of stepped sideways towards the now roaring bonfire and stretched his arm out so the marshmallow only just hit the warmth. Pippa watched, her expression echoing Will's, and within about 20 seconds he pulled his hand back. He smiled as he looked down at the gooey mess on the end of his stick. "Apparently they're good to eat like this, but I prefer them straight out of the pack." He chucked his stick behind him into the darkness and reached back into the packet, plucked out another marshmallow and popped it into his mouth. Pippa laughed as he chewed, and Monty chuckled at all the effort they'd gone to when they could have sat inside and eaten from the bag. But it wasn't the food that made a bonfire, it was the company, and as the evening wore on, he found he enjoyed theirs immensely. It wasn't like the bonfires he had with his mates. It was quiet by comparison. Instead of drunken songs or arguments about which football team might win this year's AFL Grand Final, discussions centred around the noises of the night and what kinds of animals might be making them. It was peaceful and relaxing, and the best night Monty had had with his brother for as long as he could remember. The next morning, when the time came for him to drop Will and Pippa off at the bus stop, he found himself glum at the prospect of being alone again. The three of them sat on a bench waiting for the bus, Rooster at their feet, and this time Monty wasn't watching eagerly for its approach. Beside him, Will and Pippa held hands, and Pippa's head rested on Will's shoulder. Looking on, no one would have guessed the things they had struggled with during their lives. So obviously in love, they could have been the poster couple for a Valentine's Day card.
"There's the bus,"
Pippa announced, taking her bag from her lap and slipping it over her shoulder. She and Will stood. Monty joined them, feeling strangely silly at how much he wished they could stay a bit longer. While the other passengers boarded the bus, they lingered to thank Monty for an awesome weekend. "We'll be back soon," Will promised, as he stepped forward and enveloped Monty in a hug. "Thanks, big brother." Tears prickled at the corners of Monty's eyes. At that moment, he couldn't have been more proud of Will. Would he be such a well-rounded, capable individual if his parents hadn't sacrificed everything they had to help him? They'd been so proactive, seeking out treatment and assistance that wasn't widely available back then, and it looked like all those expensive early intervention programs had paid off. Monty realised he was glad his parents had made all those sacrifices, even if he'd missed out on a few things as a result. As he watched the bus fade into the distance, this knowledge weighed heavily on his mind. He thought about nothing else as he drove back to the farm. Rooster bounced around in the passenger seat, still excited by the extra attention he'd received that weekend. But while the dog was good company, Rooster's love didn't complete him. Back at Clancy's breakaway, he discarded his boots at the door, let Rooster bound in ahead, and shut the door behind them. It didn't slam, but the noise echoed through the desolate house. Not in the mood to cook dinner, he grabbed a beer and a large pack of salt and vinegar chips from the pantry and headed for the couch. He picked up the remote and switched on the TV, which had been silent all weekend. No joy there, either. With a sigh, he glanced around his house, sparsely fitted out with only the most basic furniture, then looked out the window at the property he'd worked his ass off for over a decade to buy. What was the point? There was still a massive gaping hole in his life, in his heart. He still hadn't found the satisfaction he was supposed to. As usual, Faith was absolutely right. A house without a family was empty, and a dream with no one to share it with meant nothing. Will, who had struggled his whole life to connect socially with other people, had overcome most of these hurdles and was living a fuller life than Monty. These walls were empty without Faith's laughter, just as his life was meaningless without her in it. All the feelings he'd been trying to suppress the last few weeks suddenly rushed to the surface. He needed to see her. Now. Chapter 32. Faith had resumed taking a natural calming tablet before bed. It helped her sleep and ensured her nights weren't filled with nightmares of Monty, but it also made getting up in the morning harder. She'd always been an early riser, but lately Ryan was often up before her, and Daisy was usually craning her head over the fence when Faith arrived, as if wondering whether she was going to show. She got the feeling the cow sensed her sadness. Her milk supply had suddenly dropped dramatically, so that Faith almost didn't know if it was worth persevering, but she wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. One morning she walked into the kitchen on her way to the door, and Ryan gestured to the table. "I made you tea, if you like." "Thanks." She picked up the mug and let the warmth seep into her fingers. As she lifted it to her mouth, she noticed Ryan was grinning. "What's so funny? Is my jumper on back to front or something?" "No." Ryan shook his head with a half laugh. "I just woke up feeling happy. Sorry about that." She managed a slight smile and drank more tea. It wasn't as though she could expect everyone to walk around grumpy for the rest of her days. Putting the half-empty mug on the table, she said, "Thanks for the tea, bro. I'll see you later." The gravel crunched under her feet as she crossed the yard to Daisy's paddock, but there was no sign of her. Her heart picking up speed, Faith scanned down the fence line where the cow usually waited. "Daisy!" she called, starting to run, frantically squinting across the paddock. "Daisy!" The low rumble of a cow's voice responded. She stopped and listened, realizing the sound came from behind her. In the shed. Had Ryan milked her already? Was that why he wore that ridiculous grin? Wary, she turned and started towards the noise. The door was already open, and she strode through, her blood freezing at the sight inside. Monty, sitting on her old stool, milking the cow. Although he faced away, Faith would recognize that scruffy golden hair and impressive shoulders anywhere. Her belly somersaulted pleasurably. Daisy looked up, and Faith swore she actually smiled. Damn traitorous cow. She was such a hussy. In direct opposition, Faith's lips twisted into a scowl. "What are you doing here?" He turned slowly, and her heart stopped dead in her chest. Meanwhile, downstairs, her lady bits, as Simone would put it, filled with heat and longing. A sigh escaped her lips before she could stop it. Monty may have been her every thought these last few weeks, but the memories had nothing on him in the flesh. She closed her mouth, which she realized was hanging open, and swallowed, hoping drool wasn't dripping down her chin. At that moment, she hated herself almost as much as she hated him. Liar. You could never hate him. She ignored the voice inside her, crossed her arms over her chest, and lifted her chin. "Well?" "I missed you." Those 3 simple words threatened to unravel her. "I missed you too." And? Monty could miss her all he liked, but it meant nothing unless he'd also had a complete priorities transplant. He gave Daisy a quick pat, then stood. As he moved towards Faith, she stepped back, terrified of what her foolish mind would do if he came too close. He halted.
I've spent the last 8 hours trying to work out how the hell to say what I need to say to you. Will you just listen for a few minutes?
His voice shook with emotion. She couldn't recall a time when he'd been so unsure of himself. Okay. They stood awkwardly, like two soldiers facing each other for battle. Daisy cocked her head as if eager to eavesdrop.
I had visitors this weekend, Monty told her. Will brought Pippa down for a stay, and it was really great. We fed the cattle, had a bonfire, went on bushwalks, and we talked. I'd forgotten what a top bloke Will is.
Yes, he is. Monty took a deep breath.
This isn't easy to explain, but the last few weeks haven't been at all how I'd imagined. I had what I'd always wanted, a farm of my own, but I still didn't feel fulfilled. I've been lonely. Having Will and Pippa for the weekend was fun, but it was also an eye-opener. I watched them interacting as a couple, and I was happy for Will and jealous of what he's found with Pippa. They really care about each other. Just being with them made me reassess so many things.
His voice cracked on the last word. Faith was desperate to close the gap between them and wrap her arms around him. But no, she had to keep up her guard. They both needed him to finish.
I've been a fool, he said, and she didn't disagree. I shouldn't resent Will or my parents for the things I missed out on in order for him to have a normal life. And over the last few weeks, all that thinking, then spending time with Will has made me realise that I don't. I don't resent him at all.
Faith rolled lips one over the other. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she didn't want to shed them. Not yet. Monty's words were heartfelt. The expression on his face told her this wasn't some speech he'd rehearsed to woo her sympathy. This was something he felt deep in his heart. But he'd made no mention of her, or of them, yet.
Will needed more than I did, Monty continued. It never did me any harm to work hard. All those years of striving have stood me in good stead for any hardships I might face on the farm in years ahead. But I see now that my determination blinded me.
Oh?
Yes.
He took a step towards her, and this time she didn't step back. Hope blossomed inside her. She wanted, needed to hear what he had to say.
I was so focused on getting back what I thought had been taken from me that I missed what was really important. You were right. I did believe I was owed a farm, but that's bullshit. My parents gave me love, a roof over my head, and encouragement to pursue my dreams.
What are you saying?
Sorry.
He cursed and ran a hand through his lovely, messy mop of hair.
I knew I wouldn't be able to get this out right. What I'm trying to say is that I love you. Your love means more to me than anything in the world. Please forgive me for being the biggest tool on the planet. Will you come back with me? Having my own farm is a dream come true, but Clancy's breakaway is nothing but a shell without you.
An errant tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. While his words were music to her ears, he still hadn't mentioned children. I do love you, Monty, but I need more. I want to have children.
I know.
He rushed forward to take her hands. His touch felt so damn good.
I want that too.
You do?
He nodded. I was scared, Faith. All I could think about was what I'd had to give up when we left the farm. If that was how I felt towards Will, what if I felt like that towards my own child? I didn't know if I could make the kind of sacrifices Mum and Dad did. And I also worried about not always being able to be there for a child. Life wasn't easy for Will, and I didn't want that for my child any more than I wanted it again for me. My reasons weren't all selfish, you've got to believe me. I didn't want to be a bad father, so I thought it was safer never to be one at all.
She couldn't believe his logic. Monty, you may have harboured some resentment towards Will, but you never let it show. You never told me any of this. I had no idea. You were the best brother he could ever have asked for. Sure, your parents might have sacrificed things for Will, but so did you. You have an amazing capacity for love in your heart. Don't let fear rob you of it.
I don't want it to. I'm not going to let it. If Will has taught me one thing, it's that life is to be lived. I want to enjoy it with you, not dwell on the past, not fear the future.
A smile brightened his serious expression.
So what do you reckon? Are you willing to give me a second chance?
That had to be the best question anyone had ever asked. She laughed, and then she kissed him. It was long and sweet, and there was a fair bit of tongue involved. Her insides wobbled, and she was glad she could lean into him for support. "Sorry, I just had to get that out of my system," she said when he eventually came up for air.
It better not be out of your system. I'm hoping for a lot more of that in our future.
He pulled her close again and hugged her tight, his lips resting on the top of her head.
What do you say, Forrester? Will you come back down south with me and give Together a shot?
Will I ever? She took a deep breath, sighed, and smiled. There had no doubt been many more ups and downs in their future, but somehow she knew they'd conquered the biggest one. Epilogue. They say it's third time lucky, and Faith certainly felt different as she looked around the room at the Perth Ladies College annual alumni cocktail party. She was a different person. Happy, fulfilled, settled, lucky. Time would tell. The evening was just kicking off, and the winner of the Ms. Alumni Award wouldn't be announced for a while. But even if she'd raised the least amount of money, she'd won 1,000 times over since the last time she'd been here.
Here you go.
She smiled as Monty arrived beside her with a frosty flute of champagne.
I know it's not really your thing, but it seems to be what all the ladies are drinking.
Thanks. She took the drink, her fingers brushing against his in the exchange. Her heart fluttered, and awareness flooded her bones. She often wondered if the feeling would ever get old, but so far there were no signs of that happening. Monty had spared no expense when booking their weekend in Perth, and Faith would have been quite happy to have stayed in and enjoyed their posh hotel room together. But he had insisted on coming to the event. In fact, Faith wondered if Monty was more excited than her. She watched as he lifted his glass to his lips and gazed around the room, taking in the flashy lights and chrome interior of the new East Perth wine bar the old girls had hijacked for the event. A couple of women, friends of Kat's who were in the year above them at school, looked across, and Faith saw the moment their gazes caught on her fiancé. Their glossy pink lower lips dropped open, and they gaped unashamedly. Glowing with pride, Faith slipped a possessive arm around Monty's back and drew him close. His attention returned to her, and he bestowed upon her a grin that would never get old.
Enjoying yourself, Madam Alumna?
Stifling laughter, she pressed her finger against his lips. Shh, I haven't won anything yet. You have no idea how determined these women are. The barking ball may have been a success, but I'm small fry in the fundraising stakes. Besides, knowing we raised enough money to make a difference is all the prize I need. Monty tightened his hold on her and plonked a kiss on the top of her head.
That's why I love you, Faith Forrester. You're so modest. But in this case, I'm looking forward to saying I told you so. I've already cleared a spot on the mantelpiece for your trophy.
She rolled her eyes. We don't have a mantle, and I already told you there isn't a trophy. There's a sash and a tiara that you have to return every year, but—
Ooh, we could have a lot of fun with those, he cut in.
As heat flooded her body, Faith fought off the image of what his talented hands could do with a sash. Let's just work on surviving the night first.
Piece of piss, he said. Look, there's Kat. Let's go say hi.
Faith took a deep breath as Monty grabbed her hand and began to lead her through the hordes. She and Kat had exchanged a few emails since the ball, and Faith knew she'd permanently split with her husband. Kat also knew that Monty and Faith had mended their bridges, set up home at Clancy's Breakaway, and recently got engaged to seal the forever deal. "Faith, Monty!" Kat's eyes lit up as she spotted the two of them. She turned to let them into the small group she was chatting with, offered them both a quick hug, and then made some introductions. Ladies, you remember Faith Forrester? She's up for the award tonight. Her barking ball was not only a novel event, but also a huge success. And this is her fiancé, Daniel Montgomery. He nodded with a smile as the ladies rushed forward to offer their cheeks for a kiss.
Please call me Monty,
he told them.
We heard all about you last year, crooned one of the women, but I must admit you're even better in the flesh.
Faith thought the woman might take a bite out of Monty, but was secretly pleased by their approval. Mostly because this time Monty really was hers, not some figment of her imagination. She couldn't wait to walk down the aisle to him, even if it meant wearing a dress. He'd begged and pleaded, just this once, for him. And since it was the short magenta dress that had initially nabbed his attentions, she wasn't really opposed to the idea, not that she'd ever admit it. "And how's that sweet little town of Bunyip Bay going?" Kat asked, before taking a sip of her champagne.
We live down near Mount Barker now, Daniel reminded her.
"Oh, that's right." Kat made a tisking sound, as if she couldn't believe her mistake. "But Bunyip Bay is good," Faith interrupted. "We go back regularly." When Faith thought of all that had happened, with Ruby, Drew, Ryan, Simone, and just recently Adam and the Burtons, it was hard to believe that so little time had passed. Although tough at times, it had undoubtedly been the best year of their lives. "And how's your brother?" Kat directed this question to Monty. His smile grew even more.
Will's great. He's moved into sheltered housing 2 nights a week with Pippa, his girlfriend, and they're both working hard towards living independently. And they recently got a puppy.
Faith glowed inside at the pride in Monty's voice. She too smiled every time she thought about how far Will and Pippa had come, but it was Monty's emotional growth that made her proud. Once he'd opened up about his fears surrounding parenthood, they'd had some of the best chats of their lives. As they learned more about each other's hopes and dreams, their relationship had moved to a new level. After the wedding, they planned to try for a baby, and Monty was genuinely excited about this prospect. "Well, I guess I'd better go talk to the other contestants." Kat's voice broke Faith's reverie, and she realised she'd been in a world of her own. "Not long till the big announcement," Kat said, patting Faith on the arm as she waltzed past her and into the sea of people. The other ladies dispersed soon after, and Faith found herself alone again with her man. "Do we really have to stay for the fanfare?" she asked him. His grip circled around her wrist, gentle but firm.
"Don't you even think about going anywhere. We'll do our duty, claim your reward, and then I promise to whisk you back to the hotel and make all this socialising worth it."
"That sounds like an offer I can't refuse," she said, standing on tiptoes in order to kiss him. Monty pulled back just as things began to get heated.
"I love you, Forrester,"
he told her. "And I love you." Belinda and Harper Audio Australia hope you enjoyed the reading of Outback Dreams, Bunyip Bay, Book 1, written by Rachel Johns and read by Casey Withers. Our audiobooks are becoming increasingly popular among travellers, families, and people who are on the go. If you really enjoyed this audiobook, please introduce your friends and family to the experience. We're sure they'll love you for it. If you want to hear more about our fabulous range of titles, please visit us online at belinda.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to always take a Belinda audiobook with you.